Going on? It's the Irish Breakdown Podcast coming to you live on a Thursday, only 6 days away from spring practice officially kicking off for the 2023 season for Notre Dame. I am Ryan Roberts, Director of Recruiting here at irishbreakdown.com, joined by Mr. Brian Driscoll, the publisher here and creator of irishbreakdown.com. Brian, I know we're excited, man, because we've been doing these conversations leading up to spring ball, talking a lot about some strengths, some areas that we have more question marks with, talking a little bit about some position battles over the last couple days as well. And now we're going into a spot that matters very, very much. The guys that are potentially going to be those breakout players to take some of these positions, hopefully to the next level, or at least the roles to the next level. So it's going to be a spirited conversation today, one I'm looking very much forward to. We're also doing mailbag, obviously, in the second segment of the show. So if you want to throw in MB in the chat and get your questions in there, helps us designate what mailbag questions you have for us, but just kind of flood it with chat in the chat because we'll get to those. And before I start, I would just want to say, if you also guys want to go right now, go sign up at boards.irishbreakdown.com because tomorrow, for everybody that follows recruiting, is the Pot of Gold extravaganza. We're expecting a whole lot of offers to be extended for the 2025 recruiting class by Notre Dame. So if you all want some intel, players that are being offered, all the great stuff. And also, as we inch closer to the spring practice beginning, we'll also be having a lot more team intel as we see who is going to be breaking out, weight gains, weight changes, a lot of great stuff. But Brian, of course, the show is predicated today, man, on talking about some potential spring breakouts. We had this on from the offensive side perspective, the defensive side. Excited to talk about this, man, because there's a lot of young, exciting talent and some guys that are in some interesting positions to potentially get starting roles or at least get, a substantial role within an offense or the defense. But there are some question marks, man, and I'm excited to work through some of these guys that could answer some of those question marks with big spring performances.
Well, look, this is true of, about every team I've ever seen, right? It's true of Georgia's teams. It's true of Alabama's teams, Notre Dame's teams, Clemson's teams, Ohio State's teams, LSU's 2019 team. You need guys to break out, right? You can't just have everybody be what they were last year. That's the reality of it. Some guys are stepping into the starting lineup that didn't play much. Some guys played a bunch as backups. Now they're starters. Some guys are newcomers. Some guys are, maybe didn't play well in the past. And we see it all the time. You see guys kind of go from a good backup to key starter, okay, solid starter to difference maker. You see it all the time, right? We talk about when Will Fuller, Golden Tate went from 6 catches a year or 6 catches as freshmen to 1,000 yards as sophomores, right? Equinemi St. Brown goes from 1 catch as a freshman to, he would have had 1,000 yards if they'd have played a bowl game that year, just under 1,000 yards. So you see this all the time where, Cole Kmet as a junior, he was a backup his first 2 years, a good backup, right? An important backup, but a backup his first 2 years. And then as a junior breaks out, has a big year. So in order to get to where you want to get to and where you need to get to as a program, you need guys to break out. And the more guys that break out, the better you're going to be. And so, we kind of have our eyes on some guys on both sides of the ball that we think could be breakout guys this spring. Guys are going to really step into a certain role this spring, and then more will kind of step up and emerge in the fall. And so what is a breakout, Ryan? A breakout can be many different things. It can be a guy that just never plays that turns into a key reserve, an impact reserve. Jaden Thomas, for me, for example, was a breakout player last year.
Yep.
Only had 20-some catches, but he didn't play at all his freshman year. And then he becomes a very key player. You can be a starter and a good, solid player to a great player. There's all types of different types of breakouts, but you need them to happen. And if Notre Dame is going to be the team that we think they can be, then those breakouts have to happen soon, right? Some of them at least have to happen soon. And we've got some interesting one, Ryan. So, you and I kind of took 3 each on each side of the ball, and we were kind of on the same page, although not every time the same player. We were at least on the same page as far as positions and things like that. So it'll be fun to talk about as we get into this. But the reality is, Ryan, we're going to mention like 5 dudes on each side of the ball. They need at least 3 of each of those guys to break out this spring if the offense and defense are really going to take that step, because there's shoes to fill, and you need certain players to fill those shoes. And shoes to fill isn't always a guy stepping in directly for a specific position. It could be, Mitchell Evans could step in and fill the shoes of Michael Mayer as the starter, but it doesn't mean that we're asking Mitchell Evans to be what Michael Mayer was, that may be Jaden Thomas or Deion Coles, Lorenzo Styles, or Tobias Merriweather, that kind of thing. So it's not only just filling a position, but sometimes filling a role. Hey, this guy steps up into a leadership role. This guy steps up to a playmaking role that maybe somebody a different position occupied. And that's what this team needs as we go into this.
And I think the fun part is that every time people ask about breakouts, what do we always get drawn to, Brian? Talent, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then what's missing on the roster, right? The important areas that maybe Notre Dame hasn't been as good at last year or in recent years that we think that could be potentially filled this offseason. So it's a fun conversation because we're not just talking about guys that are, going to be breakouts by default, the best of, a less than stellar group, right? We're talking about guys that, I don't want to break any news here, but we're going to talk about a couple pass catchers, coming up pretty soon here that are freaks, man. Like they're not,
right.
Just like solid football players. Like they're substantial NFL potential if those guys hit close to their ceilings. Like we're talking about like legitimate talents at each of these positions, which is always fun because when you talk about how is Notre Dame going to get to the next level? Well, we're going to talk about some talents that could propel it and make it get to that type of level because you need that star power in order to be an elite level program. And I think Notre Dame has more than maybe people give them credit for sometimes. It's just about, can they tangibly turn it into production this offseason? Can they put themselves in a position this spring to catapult themselves into a starting role, into a substantial role? And that's why this is always a fun conversation, in my opinion.
And that's where we're going to start, Ryan. We're going to start on offense, and we're going to start with pass catchers because look, you can make a case that Jaden Thomas could be a breakout. I'm kind of working with the assumption that he kind of already did late last season. I'm kind of treating him as a guy that has already broken out to a degree. So that's why neither of us went with Jaden Thomas because I kind of view him as, by the end of the year, he was pretty much Notre Dame's best receiver by the end of the season. His numbers on the season, won't blow you away, 25 catches, 361 yards, and 3 touchdowns, but he did most of that in the last 4 games of the year. Yeah. He had 12 of those 25 catches were in the last 3 games, and 189 of those yards were in the last 4 games. So, a lot of that production we saw from him down the stretch. And so I kind of feel like he already did break out a little bit. So we're going to focus on a couple guys that didn't kind of have that. And look, we could go with Lorenzo Styles. He's another guy. I think right now Lorenzo is sort of in show me mode for both of us. He could easily be that guy. But I think where we're at, Ryan, is one of the 2 big guys has to break out. And I think there's 2 possible options. And we'll kind of each state the case for why that guy could be it. But Notre Dame needs one of Tobias Merriweather and Deion Coles to break out this spring. And if both of them break out, then this offense is going to be really good, Ryan. But I know a guy that you're super high on is Deion Coles, and is a guy that you think could be a breakout for Notre Dame. And again, we're talking spring. We're talking about guys that we're kind of predicting to be breakouts. By the end of the spring, we're going to be like, okay, there we go with that guy.
Right. Because I think that there's a lot of reasons for this one for me about Deion Coles. One, it's the talent level, right? Which I don't have to tell anybody about. He's 6'5", 200 plus pounds, really athletic, incredible catch radius. Like I don't have to tell you all about that. You all have seen his huddle highlight tapes come out of high school, and you saw what he did over the last couple games of the season where you saw him start looking more comfortable and more impactful, obviously, in the offense. And part of that is another big reason why I think that he could potentially transition into this offseason with some momentum because he was playing his best football down the stretch. He was playing like a confident version of Deion Coles. And if he's able to translate that into consistency from a day in, day out perspective, I think he has a chance to be special. I really do. And then another thing, Brian, is that, he played a little bit as a freshman, played more as a sophomore. Now it's coming into junior year, man, that's where you see guys usually take massive leaps, right? So I look at that on top of the fact that he is that boundary type receiver, which historically, recently anyway, has been a position that Notre Dame has really, they've really have focused and highlighted that position as far as like one of their main pass catcher in most years, right? So I think when you couple all those things together, I'm excited because I've said this for, this entirety of this offseason so far. A confident Deion Coles is a scary thing, man. That's a player that no corner wants to see because there's no corner that's going to be able to outreach him. There's no corner that's going to be able to match up consistently against that size and that athletic combination. It's just about the finer details of playing the position and the confidence level. If Deion's confident this offseason, I think he has a chance to propel himself into, if not the top receiver on the roster, second. Like, he's in that conversation, in my opinion.
I don't really care if he's first or second or third. What we need is Deion to start playing to his potential. All right. I really don't care if it's from the production of Michael Floyd or Tobias Merriweather, or Chase Claypool, like the monster. It doesn't even need to be like that for me. The thing with Deion for me is he's just such a unique weapon. And they really don't have anyone like him on the roster. Even Tobias can match Deion like height and lengthwise to a degree, but he's just not the. I mean, you're talking about a 20-some plus pound difference in weight between those two guys and a different type of skill set. Deion is a pure boundary receiver, in my view, and a guy that has sort of that, hey, even when he's covered, he's not covered mentality. There's no doubt, Ryan, he could have a junior year emergence breakout that we saw maybe from Miles Boykin in I think it was technically his senior season, but it was first year as a Miles flashed a little bit the year before. If you remember, we saw something like this recently, Ryan, and this is why I bring up Miles Boykin, because Miles didn't do a thing his first 2 years at Notre Dame. He actually had less production in his first 2 years than Deion Colsey did. Miles didn't play at all as a freshman, and then went out in year 2 and I think caught like 6 balls. Most of it was in mop-up duty, because he was a 17 member. And then in his third year, he comes out and has 12 catches for 253 yards and 2 touchdowns. But he had that really big game late in the year against LSU, and that served as sort of a springboard for him to kind of come out. But the year before Miles became the guy for the Notre Dame pass game, he had 12 catches for 253 yards and 2 touchdowns. It's not a whole lot different than what we've seen from Deion Colsey, who is a year behind. But Deion had 4 catches for 67 yards as a freshman. He had 9 catches for 192 yards last year. And again, he didn't do a lot in the bowl game, but he played really well against USC, had a big money third down catch against Boston College, had 2 huge third down catches against Navy. So really played well down the stretch. And the first time we saw him in action, really getting serious snaps, was against Syracuse, and he made 3 catches that game. And Ryan, you and I were there, and we kept looking at each other like Deion was open again. They could have hit him he could have caught 13 balls that day on stop routes and comebacks and back shoulders.
The comeback was open all day, man. Those guys were all bailing on it. He could just hit him on comebacks all day, man, with a confident quarterback that day.
So he's got the tools. Now he needs to kind of take – him and Miles are also really similar too, because with Miles, the question was always, how good does he really want to be? Yeah. And can he consistently go out there and put in the work and put in, sort of have the focus and be consistent with his preparation and his execution? And that was Miles' problem in previous years. Deion's been similar, right? Like when he's on, he's really on. When he's off, it's like, where is he today? It's just, But the thing that people have to remember too is Deion is almost a year younger than most of the kids in his class. So my understanding is he's going to be a little closer in age to Tobias and some of the freshmen than he will be to like a senior, Matt Salerno or guys like that. He was young for his age. Now he doesn't look it because he's massive, but he's very young. And he played at a level, Ryan, where he could play half speed and just dominate. I mean, just that's where people say, oh, this guy played at a weak level. That has nothing to do with your talent. Zero to do with your talent. That has to do with, can you evaluate a guy when he's playing against bad guys? It's more about your skills as an evaluator. 4-5 is a 4-5. I don't care what you're playing against. Yeah. Where it can have an impact, however, is a guy may think he's playing hard. A guy may think he's doing things the best he can because he's dominating. But in reality, he's just going by on God-given ability. My hope is that what Deion did late last year, combined with the struggles he had in the bowl game, are enough to combine together to say, hey, man, I can be really good, but I got to bring it every day. I got to play with more authority, more assertiveness, because if he can do that, Deion's got a chance to be an absolute dude on the football field for Notre Dame. And hopefully we'll start to see it this spring. On the other side is Tobias Merriweather. And to me, Ryan, he's very similar as well. It's the consistency. He was a young player last year. He's got to continue to get stronger. The tools are there. He's a different player. He's more of a vertical player. He's a guy that can do some things after the catch. He's a very good route runner for his age. He's a guy that I don't if you go back and watch his high school film, you're going to see this guy knew how to get off press. He probably showed up at Notre Dame with the best get off press skills of anyone on the roster simply because he was taught how to do it in high school. He's a guy to me, Ryan, that he brings a completely different element to the table than Dion in a lot of ways, but they bring similar length and catch radius that Sam Hartman and Tyler Buckner are going to love. And if he can also be a guy that pushes to be a breakout for Notre Dame this year, it's going to have a big impact because, as we mentioned last week, it's not just them breaking out that's important for that impacts Notre Dame. If Tobias breaks out, it impacts Lorenzo Styles, meaning he can rotate at X, but then you can now use him at Z as well. You can move him around and do different things, getting him on the field together. If Dion breaks out at W, then you can use Caleb Smith more to the field in different ways as well. Now, all of a sudden, you got yourself a veteran 5-man rotation that's got some flexibility to it with Caleb Smith and Lorenzo Styles that makes you a little harder to defend. Yeah. And so I want to see both of those guys get a chance to do that. And if I'll say this, they need one of them to break out. Definitely need one of them. And if Tobias doesn't have a good spring, you still have Lorenzo. You can move Caleb Smith over to the field. If Dion doesn't break out, you've got Caleb Smith. So you're going to be okay. But if one of them breaks out, it's going to have a huge impact on this wide receiver core. And I think it's the reason I picked those two guys, Ryan, for me, is they need one of the big boys to really emerge. Yeah. Yes, it's good if Lorenzo emerges, and Caleb Smith, we already know what he can do. We know what Jaden Thomas can do. I think his Jaden Thomas is going to be the same guy he was last year, just at a higher volume. Yes. And let me say last year, meaning like from like BYU on is kind of what I expect to see from Jaden Thomas, especially last 4 years. Last 4 games. That's what I mean by he'll be that, but just more consistent. We won't see the periods where he didn't do much like he did last year is really his first year in the rotation. We won't see, I don't think, any Marshall games like we saw from him last year. That's fine. They need one of the big boys to step up this spring. They have to get one of those two guys if this receiving core is going to have a chance to reach its full potential.
I've talked about this a lot too, but I also think that we're talking about two of, arguably the two most talented receivers on the roster, right? With the Tobias Merriweather and a Deion Colzie for one. I guess Braylon James is in that conversation now that he is officially on the roster, right? So we can have that conversation. But I think the reason, Brian, for me, that I definitely go towards these two outside receivers is also it's Sam Hartman. We have to look into the history of what Sam Hartman has excelled with during his career at Wake Forest. Like, you have to look at that a little bit. It was always about the outside trees, those guys that can do things at the catch point, that can do things back shoulder, could work, just can dominate in the air. And I think both those players in different ways have the potential to dominate in the air. I do think Deion Colzie's more of like the Maurice Stovall-ish style of receiver in comparison to, I don't know if you agree with this, but I think Tobias is kind of similar to someone that Sam Hartman played at Wake Forest. Like, he's got a little A.T. Perry in him, like he can create things down the field. But I think what separates the bigger guys is, like, for 6'4" dudes, you wouldn't expect them to get in and out of breaks as well as they do, right? Like, that was the thing about A.T. Perry that always separated him from me, was like, that dude could get in and out of breaks, play with low pads, silky hips, kind of getting in and out of his cuts. Like, that stuff's different, right? So they are comparable in the sense that they are taller and that they can win in certain areas, although a little bit differently. But at the end of the day, if Sam Hartman's the quarterback for Notre Dame, we have known what he has liked while he was at Wake Forest. He liked A.T. Perry. He liked Donovan Green, who was 6'2", 210 pounds. He liked Jamal Banks, that was a 6'3" outside receiver this past year. That's been his bread and butter, man. And that's also why I also think that they're going to break out, not only because Sam has comfort in him, but I think back to last year, you remember, like, there was, I think it was the Syracuse game that we were both at, and we're like, dude, there's so many one-on-one opportunities outside the numbers if they just take it, right? Well, Drew Pine might not throw that ball, but who's going to throw that ball? Sam Hartman's going to throw that ball. He's going to put that ball up there, man. So whether it's Tobias, whether it's Deion, I think there's going to be opportunities to make plays. It's just about who takes advantage of those opportunities.
I think that's a big thing. You made a comment, Ryan, and people like comps, right? Like, here's why, to me, here's what this unit could be, in my opinion. I truly believe this. They remind me so much of Mo Stovall and Jeff Samardzija. They really do. you mentioned the Mo Stovall comparisons between him and Deion Colzie, and they're very, very good ones. Not a burner, although I'd argue I would not be shocked if Deion runs a faster 40 time than Mo Stovall did. It
What was
would
he in
not
the
shock me.
4.5s or something like that,
He
Mo?
was close to 4.6, and that was
Yeah.
after 5 years and
Yeah.
training for it. I'd be willing to bet you that Deion even has a better vertical pure speed than Mo did, but insane catch radius.
Yes.
And great body control. Mo was another guy that it took a while for it to kind of click for him. He didn't really kind of go off until his last year. Now, of course, playing in Charlie Weiss's offense helped with that, but it took him a while to get going. But it's that big physical boundary, can catch a now screen and make one guy miss and pick up 12 yards. If you play off of him, he can do that. If you play on him, he can hit you with the comebacks. He can beat you in the one-on-ones with that crazy catch radius. Deion can do all those things.
Yep.
Now, can he do it day after day after day? That's the question. And then Samardzija wasn't the strong physical player that Mo was, but very similar lengthwise. He's a little skinnier. He wasn't a burner, but he could make big plays because of that length. Like the touchdown that Tobias had against Stanford. He smoked the guy at first, but guy recovered because Tobias isn't a 4.4 guy, right? But he understood the body positioning. He went up and made a play on the ball. He can make plays after the catch. He's really good after the catch guy. I mean, he was a returner in high school. Now, I don't want him returning in college, but in high school, he's a pretty good return man. He can catch a slant, make a guy miss, cut back outside. I'm in my mind, I'm envisioning the play that Samardzija had against Michigan State in 06, right? Like Tobias has similar athleticism to Samardzija. Now, here's the question. Do they have the attitudes that those two guys had?
Sure.
That's the question. Do they have the work ethic that those two guys had? That's the question. If they do, this has a chance to be a dynamic 1-2 punch. The talent is there. The system, I think, will be there. It's a bit of a projection. We don't know. Thank you. But I think it's there. Now we just have to see if those two guys are ready mentally to become that player. That's going to be the big question.
I mean, hopefully they both break out, man, because they would be a perfect complement to one another, Brian. It's like, because Deion Colzie is more of like that power forward style of big wide receiver, right? Tobias Merriweather's more of that small forward. Like he's a wing. He's athletic. He does some of the little man stuff that you wouldn't expect for a guy his size to do, which I like the Samardzija comp because that was one thing about Samardzija was a big guy. He was tall, but he was silky, man. Like he can get in and out of cuts. He can move in space. He can just do a little bit more than what your traditional boundary receiver is going to do, which is why he could play to the field a lot during his career at Notre Dame. So I think that you have a perfect complement if both of those guys take a step. I don't need both of them to turn into 1,000-yard receivers in 2023, right? But I need them both to be able to play off one another well, complement each other. Because if they can do that and they take a step forward, you add in what you're expecting out of Jaden Thomas as a second year of high-level slot play, or at least substantial burn on the inside playing slot, man, that's an interesting compliment to work with and one that I think Notre Dame should be very excited about.
So there was just a robbery that just happened during the show. So my wife brought me down a cup of tea. So appreciated that. That's what I said thank you for. I look up, and she's grabbing some cash I had on the corner, and she goes, "Thanks for the tip." She puts it in her pocket and she walks
Nice.
away. It's got robbed right here live during the show. But I agree with you on this, on the Tobias stuff. He can do some of the smaller guy stuff, but still brings that long go up and get it catch radius. It's about the assertiveness now, and that's what him and Deion have to show. The next position, Ryan, we'll kind of stick with pass catchers for now. I think this is an interesting one. And we both kind of go with tight ends. And it's another situation of one of these two has to step up this spring. They need one of these two to step up this spring. The guy that you went with, Ryan, was a young buck.
Sorry, I couldn't hit the unmute button. That's my apologies. Yes, I went with Holden Stace. I did. And I'll be very honest, Brian, this was a close one. And it makes a lot of sense why we went here at tight end. This was a close one between Holden Stace and Mitchell Evans for me. I went with Holden because I think that he just has a little bit of a different skill set at the tight end position that Notre Dame doesn't have a ton of on the roster right now, especially with the injuries that they have, right? Because I could look at if Eli Raridan was able to play in the spring, I could say that could be your flex style tight end that can do some stuff in the passing game, could be that mismatch weapon. I think Mitchell Evans could be a very productive pass catcher. We've talked about that all offseason so far. But Holden Stace brings just a little bit of a different style. I don't want Mitchell Evans out of line too much, right? Like I want him to be an inline player for the most parts. Holden Stace, I want him to be that H-back. I want to see him as a big slot at times. I want to really utilize his mismatch upside that he has as a pass receiver as the tight end position. So when I look at it and I say Mitchell Evans breaks out, that's awesome, right? And I think that he has the obviously the inside track to doing so. And he still very well could, even if Holden Stace takes a good step forward. I'm just thinking about the mismatch potential that it could be if Holden Stace breaks out. If you could play 12 personnel, which we've seen a lot of over the last couple of years, but we haven't seen them run a lot of the ability to really spread the field and attack with both tight ends a lot during the last couple of years. If you have Holden Stace that could be a legitimate weapon in the passing game on top of what Mitchell Evans could also bring as the lead tight end, I think that your offense is almost unstoppable because then there's going to be levels where when you're in 11 personnel, hey, whether it's Mitchell or Holden in, we could do different things with both those guys. We still have our wide receivers being productive, but then as the defenses bring in these bigger packages defensively, their traditional maybe 4-3 packages or whatever the heck they run as their base defense, all of a sudden you have Holden Stace who can motion out and be a slot receiver matched up against a linebacker. And that could be a big impact potential for this team specifically. So I think Holden Stace, with the injuries in the room from the depth perspective, I think he has a chance to take hold of that number 2 tight end role and really become a valuable member of the passing attack potentially.
My hope is they both really step up this spring, big time. I'm going with Mitchell Evans because I still think it's very important that the traditional tight end role be impactful in this offense. I think that's incredibly important. I agree with everything you said about Holden Stace. Absolutely. I had him a little lower coming out of high school than maybe some others might have because he was raw. He needed a lot of technical work, but the upside was enormous. I mean, you knew eventually he has a chance to be a really good player. I view him as breaking out as sort of a bonus, Ryan. To me, Mitchell Evans isn't just a guy that I'm predicting to have a breakout. They need him to have a breakout because I think you'll admit Holden Stace is not, ready yet to be that attached block of 9 technique, down block and drive, work to the second level, big physical presence over the middle type of guy. He's not that guy yet. They need that in this offense to be a presence in the run game and the pass game. And, a lot of the emphasis tends to be on the pass game, and I think Mitchell Evans will certainly make an impact in the pass game. I mean, I think what we saw from him in the South Carolina game, if he just repeats that every week this year, he's going to be a really good tight end because, some weeks he'll get 3 catches for 39 yards like he did. But as you and I have discussed, Ryan, you saw the all-22. You saw at least 2 or 3 other potential opportunities for him to get the football. It just went in other directions, which is it's part of it. It just does that sometimes. Yeah. Point is he can be a 3 to 5 catch per game guy, 39 to 65 yards per game. That's a good season. That's a really good season for a non-Michael Mayer, Brock Bowers type of tight end, right?
No doubt.
They need that. But more importantly, I really think Mitchell's breakout this year is going to be beyond the pass game. I see a kid that was a converted quarterback that honestly played a year too early. He just did. He had no business, in my opinion, being on the field as a freshman, looking at it from his viewpoint, meaning I don't think he was ready yet. But you know what he did, Ryan? He battled.
Yeah.
He competed, right? And even though he was a little overwhelmed at times physically, because, again, he's a true freshman converted quarterback, and I don't think he played spring. I don't think he was here that spring. I could be wrong. But I don't think Mitchell Evans was an early enrollee. He was thrust into that role because of injuries. And he equated himself well, in my opinion. He competed. Even though he wasn't that good, he competed. You could see some of the tools. Then he gets injured, and he comes back this year. He immediately gets thrown into the lineup. It takes him a couple games to get going. He was not very good the first couple games he came back, in my opinion. But by the end of the year, he kept getting better and better and better. and you started to say he's getting open a little bit more. They're doing some more things. They ran him on a corner route in the game where if the ball would have come out to him, he's open for what would have been a big play. Then he finally gets his chance to beat the guy in the bowl game, and he does it well. But the reality is, even then, I still feel like last year he was playing more out of need and injury, not so much because he was technically ready, physically the way that you normally expect a tight end to be. All of that's going to benefit him, though, Ryan, because now going into his junior year 3 under Matt Balis, now I think you're going to see the body really explode for him. Because I've said this about Mitchell Evans and Joe Walt. He looks like a little kid. If you saw Mitchell Evans, like if you didn't, I mean, you see him as a human, you're like, that's a big boy. Like he's 6'5", he's 250 plus. You think that's a grown man. But if you only could see him like here, you're like, that's like a 17, 15, 16-year-old kid. He has a baby face. He doesn't look, I mean, then you see Michael Mayer and you're like, is that guy like in his mid-20s? Is he like a 4-year? Is he a guy that got drafted 5 years ago and he's coming back to visit the college?
When he was a senior in high school, Michael Mayer looked like that.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you see he looks like a kid.
Yeah.
And so the reason I say that is he has not hit that, to me, fill out period of his career yet. And I think that comes this offseason. I really do. And so it's not just the pass game where I'm talking about here. That's going to be a big factor in the run game. Because the thing I'll say about Mitchell his first 2 years, he wasn't a very good blocker more often than not, but he competed. He just lacked the technical skill and the strength. It got better and better as he got more and more coaching from Jared Parker, and he got better by the end of the year. But you could still see he wasn't quite there yet physically compared to, where Mayer was, where when Mayer's technique was right, Mayer could whoop your butt. When Mitchell's technique was right, he kind of got in your way.
Right.
Now I expect him to become a bit more of a mover now that he gets another full year in the weight room under his belt. I think he's going to be one of the guys that has some of the biggest strength gains that we're going to see from the offense this year. I really do. And that's where my prediction for him comes from. It's not even just the pass game, Ryan. I don't think his pass game numbers are going to be anything close to Michael Mayer. I mean, no one at Notre Dame has ever had the single season pass game production that Michael Mayer had the last 2 years, other than 1 year from Tyler Eifert. And that's where I come from on this, Ryan, is it's going to be that dual threat potential and impact that he's going to bring, which is why I think Mitchell Evans is definitely a breakout guy for me.
Would it shock you if Mitchell Evans showed up this year and in spring or in the fall and he's like 260 pounds? Because it's just like he's finally growing into his body. Like I wouldn't be shocked at all about that,
I mean, I don't want him to be that big, but it wouldn't shock me at all. It wouldn't shock me at all, Ryan.
Because he has that crazy body, man, where it's like he's holding 250 plus and it just looks like it's just
baby fat.
Yeah,
I mean,
seriously.
Like he doesn't have definition. I mean, you'll see pictures of guys, and he's putting in work. I mean, everything I hear and see, I'm getting results this offseason from some different sources of how the work that the tight ends are putting in and different things like that. And you start to see, okay, like this guy's, I mean, he's putting in the work. It's very clear he's putting in the work. It's just, where is he as far as just filling out that body and just turning the work ethic you start seeing more results from it. And I think that's where Mitchell is now. I think you're going to start seeing more and more of that from him moving forward. And now, again, we don't expect Eli Raritan to be part of the spring. If he was healthy, he'd be in this conversation as well. There's no doubt. If not at the top of the list.
He would probably be my pick if he was healthy, to be completely transparent about that. But I think the tight end position especially is very interesting, Brian, because working off of our first picks here, right, with the wide receiver position, if the wide receivers do take that step forward, the outside receivers I'm talking about, it's going to be open a whole lot more? Middle of the field, baby. And Mitchell Evans at 6'5 plus, 250 plus pounds is a very inviting target over the field. So, yeah, I'm there with it, man. I'm there with it. And you need him to be that guy because he showed flashes, obviously, in the bowl game that he maybe could take that step. And, I mean, you mentioned a little bit ago, as far as about Miles Boykin having that big bowl game and then really riding that momentum into the next offseason, kind of taking his game to the next level. Well, I think Mitchell Evans has a chance to also take some of that momentum from the bowl game, keep riding it, and solidify himself as the top tight end on this roster, which he certainly can, especially with, a couple injuries obviously on the table as well.
Well, and I'm also curious to see what kind of jump Mitchell makes, because he missed last offseason for the most part. He missed a bunch of last offseason with an injury. So he didn't get that full offseason that you'd hope a guy like him would get. And so those are the things that we're going to get a chance to see from him. Number 3 on the offensive breakout, Ryan, there's no debate. There's no him or him. Look, you want to see what Ty Chan can do. I'm looking forward to seeing if Michael Carmody's weight and what Michael Carmody's doing, and Andrew Kristofic. But here's the deal. I just flat out, Billy Schrauth is a guy that I anticipate being a breakout for Notre Dame this year. We've heard it all. He missed last spring because of an injury. So he was at school last spring, but he didn't really do much during the season because during the spring, because he was injured. Didn't really get going until closer to the summer and into fall camp. By the end of the year, I kept hearing about him constantly. I've talked to people that have gotten to know him his freshman year, and they say he just looks like such a different kid now. He came in, he was 300 pounds, but he's a pudgy 300 pounds. And they're like, you look at him now, he's like barrel chested, his like shoulders are getting bigger. He just looks like, okay, he's made quite a body transformation. And this is from a kid who's already pretty good.
Yeah.
So I think Billy Schrauth, he's going to make rookie mistakes. He is. But I think we're going to see some stuff from this kid during the spring where you're like, yeah, this guy's going to be a dude. There's no doubt he's going to seize. I fully expect and predict that he's going to seize one of those guard spots pretty early. Now, they may rotate guys around when the media is there. Here's what they'll do, right? They know when we're there, and they'll like, okay, let's work so-and-so in with the ones during the 5 periods that they're there. And I've seen this all the time in the past. So like we'll have this one guy playing guard, and he's with the ones, and you're like, oh, that's interesting because all my sources are saying this. And then they kick us out because we get the first 5 periods. And then you see like highlights of the practice when they do put those out, and you'll see all the first team highlights. The guy that we've been hearing is with the ones in the highlights. It's like, whatever. I don't know why they do that, but they do that. Who knows? But I fully anticipate by the end of the spring, we're talking about it's a no-brainer. Billy Schrauth is a starter for Notre Dame and a guy that people have very high expectations for.
I think that most people would say that it's a waste of a last spring for him, the fact that he's not able to compete, Brian. But I just think it's very beneficial that he was still there, right? Because he still saw the flow of practice. He still got to get ahead of the curve from a academic perspective and still balance team meetings with academics and do all that type of stuff. So I think despite him not participating in spring from an on-field perspective last year, he has a very good understanding going into his first legitimate spring of this is how it works, right? This is the format. This is my expectation. This is what I need to do from a day in, day out perspective. This is how the schedule kind of ramps up where like it doesn't matter as much how I look the first couple games. It matters about natural maturation throughout the spring. And then I'm playing my best football by the end of it. So he has that opportunity, man, because let's be very forthcoming about this. Everyone expects Billy Schrauth to be a starting guard for Notre Dame next season. Fans expect it. Most of the media expects it. I haven't really seen anybody project it to be anything else than Billy Schrauth at one of the guards, right? So that is a little bit of pressure on Billy, though. It is. They expect him to be that guy. And I think that he has the wherewithal and the physicality and the demeanor to take that and just kind of run with it, man. Because offensive linemen are different cats, man. Like they're wired a little bit differently, And I think that when you get him between the lines, he's really going to take advantage of it. And then I think most of the conversation is going to go from, Billy's most likely that guy, right? So let's start talking about what the other guard position is going to look like. But I think that Billy, it's important for him to have a big spring because everyone's expecting him to. And when there's expectations on you, there's pressure, obviously, to fulfill those expectations, but there's expectations for a reason. It's because Billy Schrauth is a really talented football player. And if you get those 2 tackles to play just as well as he did last year or better, and Zeke Corral to be as good as he was last year or a step better, and you get Billy Schrauth to be a dude in 2023, then we're talking about your offensive line being one of the top 5-ish offensive lines in college football to maybe being the best. Like you have that opportunity to be in that Joe Moore award-winning conversation, at least, if a guy like a Billy Schrauth takes a big step forward, because you have 3 pillars on your offensive line that are much more known commodities. It's the newcomers that I think are going to be that separating factor between being good or great or greats or elites. I think that he could be a potential separator for that offensive line.
You nailed it, Ryan. Absolutely nailed it. So those are guys that we see as breakouts. I think some other guys we could discuss, as we mentioned before, Lorenzo Styles could be a guy like that. I think you could make a case that if Jaden Thomas sees a big jump in production, that could be considered a breakout. I think it would certainly be a breakout nationally. I just feel like it's kind of like we as people that follow Notre Dame on a day-to-day basis, we've already seen Jaden Thomas step up and be the best receiver on the roster. So I don't really count that as – I think we're just going to see him just build on that this upcoming season. So that's why we didn't go with him. I think you could have made a case for Blake Fisher in this conversation. If the breakout is from a good starter to a star, I think Blake could be in this conversation. I wouldn't be shocked at all, Ryan, if that were the case. And that would be considered to me a breakout, is to see a guy like Blake Fisher go from, hey, he was a pretty good redshirt freshman last year, to, okay, this guy's one of the best tackles in college football now. He may not get the recognition because Joe Alt will probably get a lot of the press clippings. But when you and I sit down and watch film, I'm willing to make this prediction now. No player on offense will warrant more questions for you from the NFL scouts and the agents and the people you know in the draft world. No one will get more questions directed towards you than Blake Fisher when people start watching film. It's going to be him or one of the receivers, I promise you, because you've already got a lot about the running backs. Yes. Maybe Mitchell Evans, but I have a feeling, because they're going to be like, holy moly, like we're watching this Joe Alt film and we kept seeing this number, this number 54 on the other side just crushing people.
Who's this 6'6", 330-pound dude?
That moves. Yeah, where'd this kid come from? I could certainly see him being that kind of guy as well. You can make a case that the running backs could be breakouts, but again, I think we've already seen it. We've already seen them be big-time players. We've already seen them be a dynamic duo in multiple games, including the bowl game. I think the only other potential options would be, maybe a freshman or in the fall when some guys come back from injury or things along those lines. So, but I think that's where the offensive breakout list is as of right now. Because again, Sam Hartman's not. I mean, the only way you could call him a breakout is if he goes out and wins the Heisman, right? I mean, the guy's one of the 20 most prolific passers in the history of college football. I mean, I think he ranks like 18th in yards and 19th in touchdowns or something like that. Like, what kind of breakout are you expecting from him, right? So I think that's where we are in the breakout list for offense. Let's move over to the defense, Ryan. I think this is going to be an interesting conversation as well. We're going to we've got guys on all three levels. And again, it's going to be similar. There's one position we both nailed the same exact dude, no questions asked. But then there's other two spots where it could be this guy, could be that guy. Yeah. And I think when you look at this team, it all starts up front, Ryan. And look, we expect them to have a great corner tandem. And I think the safety depth chart's a little underrated as far as what comes back. I think they were pretty solid last year. There's a perception among Notre Dame fans they're not that good. I think they were pretty good last year as a group, right? We'll see what they can be this year. That remains to be seen. Linebackers, we've had plenty to talk about. But at the end of the day, if this is going to be a championship caliber football team, a playoff caliber football team, your defensive line is going to have to be better than it was a year ago. You're going to have to do that without three of your most productive players, Isaiah Foskey, Jason Adamiola, and Justin Adamiola. So the only way that your defense can make that jump is if you have some breakout players. This is one of those spots where, Ryan, where I think you could have multiple guys breaking out. Riley Mills at 3 technique. Maybe Nana or Javante John Baptiste, or maybe an Alexander Ahrensberger or a Tyson Ford as Aiden go by a big end. One of those big ends could have a breakout. But there's one position to me where one, hopefully two guys break out and provide a really dynamic 1-2 punch. And that's where we're going to begin. And I'll let you kind of kick things off because we're talking about the Viper position.
Yeah, and I was going back and forth between Riley Mills and picking Joshua Burnham, and I ultimately did pick Joshua Burnham because for me, I expect Riley Mills to take a nice step forward this year, hopefully a big step, but he was still productive last year, right? He was still a starter. You still saw a lot of positive signs out of Riley Mills. I don't know what to expect out of Joshua Burnham. I don't. He's one of those kids where you know that the talent level is there. 6'4 plus, 245. You've mentioned 37-inch verts, free coming out of high school, 23 reps on the bench. Like, he's a really talented kid. There's zero doubt about it. but he barely played last year. You saw a glimpse of it in the Boston College game, but for the most part, didn't really play last year. And so there's a lot of hype about him, but there's also a lot of unknown about Joshua Burnham. I think he's going to be a very productive player this year if he's given the opportunity, because I think that he has that type of athleticism and that type of upside, that type of versatility where he could be an absolute weapon. I mean, go back and listen to our show yesterday. If you kind of doubt where I think he is from a versatility perspective, I think he can do a little bit of everything. Obviously coming in as a linebacker, former high school quarterback, like dynamic athlete, right? And he could be, for me, a breakout star because there's some unknown to him, but he might also have the highest upside at the Viper position on the roster right now. I mean, that talent level, if it is coached well, if it's developed properly, he has a chance to be special, in my opinion. Maybe won't be the guy in year one as far as the absolute, difference maker at the Viper position, but you need to get something out of him, man. You need him to be productive this year, and there's no reason that he shouldn't be.
There's no doubt he's the most talented guy, in my opinion. I don't think that's a question. My concern about putting him in this conversation has nothing to do with him and everything to do with the coaching staff. Whether they're going to coach him up appropriately, whether they're going to give him an opportunity to be that guy. I mean, that's the reality of it, Ryan. That's the only thing holding them back, in my opinion, is will they give him a chance to be that guy? If they give him a chance to be that guy and they force the issue, because this is what you have to do with a guy like Josh Burnham. And this is what drives me nuts about this coaching staff. And it's been this way even before Marcus Freeman and the staff showed up. It's like they hold younger players to a higher standard than older players. They'll let a veteran go through 5 straight crap practices and still keep throwing them out there. But a younger player has to prove above and beyond, what he can do, or you don't push him. And for me, it's force the issue with kids like him. Get him out there. I don't care if he has 3 straight bad days in a row. Keep throwing him out there and then figure out why he's having a bad day and work on it. Spend extra time with him after practice. Do whatever, because when you've got a kid with his athletic tools, if you can't get him ready to play, I'm sorry, that's on you. Because I've never heard anyone question that Josh Burnham puts into work. I've seen some numbers from offseason testing, and let me assure you, Ryan, he's almost always at the top of the list when it comes to the production and offseason workouts.
You don't put 23 reps on the bench as a sophomore if you're not working. Like, you just don't do that stuff.
Correct. I mean, if I could kind of tell you some of the stuff that I've seen, it's like, okay, this dude is an absolute freak in the weight room as well. So if you don't get him ready to go, man, that's on you. That's absolutely on you. And so I need to see this staff do that. If I had more faith in this coaching staff on defense, I'd absolutely be right there with you. But if they can get him going, man, then you're going to have something special, because the guy that I think is going to be a breakout this year, and I do think he still qualifies as a breakout because he's never been more of sort of a situational guy. I really anticipate Jordan Patel will be kind of coming that guy. If he can get his head on straight and keep it on straight and really lock in and stay hungry, I think Jordan Patel has a chance to be a really special player and do some really impressive things this spring and be a guy that just every single day, his motor, his twitch, his power, his demeanor, he plays with an edge, like almost to the borderline of, he was a little dirty early in his career. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you kind of like that. Like, hey, bro, let's pull it back enough to where it's not a 15-yard penalty and live in that zone.
A lot right? Easier to pull it back than pull it out of someone. So
exactly. Then the push a guy who just, gets slapped in the face and he just kind of takes it, right? Like, that's not the guy that I want. Not on defense anyway. So look, all the tools are there, Ryan. Now it's just about him putting it together, because he's a little different to me than Burnham, because we know he's going to get that shot this spring. He's going to get those reps this spring. And yes, you've got to continue to coach and develop him. But for Jordan, the only thing holding Jordan back during his Notre Dame career so far has been Jordan. Yeah. And if he stops that and kind of gets out of his own way, he may not be considered a breakout amongst Notre Dame fans because they already kind of all know who he is and view him as a potential star. But he's going to be a guy that the nation's going to be talking about. Is like, where'd this guy come from? Like, we're expecting Notre Dame to take a step back on defense because they lost Foskey, because what's the percent? Oh, Notre Dame doesn't recruit defensive ends. But Jordan Patel was a pretty highly ranked recruit. Yep. And a guy that was a really good edge rusher in high school and played all over the field. now all of a sudden people are like, wow, this Botelho guy's coming out. If by the end of the spring, we're talking about both of those guys and the production they had this spring, that's where you start saying, okay, this defensive line is going to be nasty. Because in third down packages, Ryan, if Burnham gets that shot, gets coached and developed, and then takes advantage of that by the end of the spring, they're both going to be on the field on third down next year. No, there's going to be no doubt. You'll have Botelho either in the middle or outside and kind of that stand-up roll over the middle is what I'm referring to, or lined up on one edge. Burnham's going to be on the other side. I could easily see Josh Burnham taking the role that Justin Adamiola had. And so you're going to go from an undersized, high motor, technically sound kid to just a freak athlete. And that could be very interesting. So they could both not only play in a rotation at the Viper, but then on third down and in nickel packages and against certain teams that you're going to play, you're going to see both of those kids on the field together. And if they both break out like we're talking about, if we're both right on this one, man, this pass rush is going to end up being really good. Really good.
I always think back to when I was at the Combine and I asked Isaiah Foskey about who's the breakout star on the defense for Notre Dame next year. And he went with Jordan Botelho without any hesitation, Brian. Like, that was the first guy on his mind out of the entire defense. And again, that's his former teammate in the same room saying that. So, like, there's some context there. But then I asked Nick Herbig, who came out of the same high school as Jordan Botelho in the same year, by the way. And by the way, Nick Herbig was a really dang good player for Wisconsin over the last 2 years. I think he got some votes as the Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year this past year. And he spoke highly of Jordan Botelho, obviously. And, I mean, quite frank, Jordan Botelho was a better player than Nick Herbig was coming out of high school. And, if Jordan Botelho's in Wisconsin, maybe he's in a similar situation that Herbig is as a early declaration in the 2023 NFL draft. Like, you never know as far as like what that trajectory looks like. But everybody here knows, including you, Brian, that I'm a big fan of Jordan Botelho's talents. I really am, because he brings stuff to the Viper position that, look, he's not going to be the Notre Dame all-time leading sacker when he leaves like Isaiah Foskey was, right? But he brings a little more versatility than what Isaiah had as far as what he could do from the Viper position, because Jordan's literally played linebacker. He's literally played rover. He can move around and do all that type of stuff on top of potentially being an impact pass rusher. So he is that traditional Big Sam, drop ends, however you want to kind of profile that guy, a guy that can play in space, that can rush the quarterback, can do a little bit of everything from that position. So, I mean, you don't have to sell me on Jordan Botelho, man. I think that if he has a healthy season, a season where he's fully locked in and stays within himself and stays disciplined, I think he could be a star. I have no doubt about that.
I'm going to somewhat push back on a comment that you just made. You said, I believe, that he's not going to end his career as Notre Dame's all-time leader in sacks. Is that what you said? Okay. Could you elaborate on that before I push back? I want to make sure I give you a chance to explain why you say that comment.
Yeah, I mean, so Jordan's entering his senior year. He sits here now.
2 years of eligibility left, though, yes.
Right. Yep. So he's entering his senior year with 2 years of eligibility left, 4.5 sacks last year. And I know Isaiah had a similar number, obviously, when he was a sophomore. But in back-to-back years, he has 11 sacks each. I just don't know if I'm going to see Jordan Botelho have back-to-back double-digit sack seasons. Like, that's kind of where I am with it, right? I mean, like, can you tell me that this year he has 7 or 8 sacks and then next year he has 10 or 11? Like, I'd be like, okay,
But here's the thing, though. If he has 8 sacks this year and 11 next year, that puts him like a sack away from Foskey, because he's got 6.5 career sacks going into the season, because he had 2 in 2021. So he actually has 2 more sacks than Foskey did going into his first year as a starter. So even if he has, 9 and 10, that puts him at what? 1 behind Foskey, I think, is, if I did my math correctly. So I agree with your point. I think the sacks are going to get spread around, because I think they're going to have better pass rushers around him this year. I do. But I do think he's capable of getting there if he can be that consistent edge rusher that he's capable of being. That's the only reason I would say that he has a chance. I just wanted to make sure that that explanation makes sense. I would somewhat push back on it, because I think that if he's their best pass rusher, we've seen from this defense, it's going to produce a lot of sacks from that Viper position. You could argue that maybe it gets split up between him and Burnham and Jr. a little bit more than it did when Foskey was there. That's very fair.
Yeah.
But I just want to make sure that we're on the same page too. He still has 2 years of eligibility left, because he played as a freshman in 2020, but it was the COVID year and it didn't count for him. So he still has 2 years of eligibility left.
Yeah, because I think when you look at Foskey, there's talent behind him in the last 2 years, to play in the Viper position. Like you talked about Justin Adamalola, for instance, right? But it was like you knew Isaiah Foskey was going to be the guy, though, right? Like you knew he was going to be that guy. I think that Jordan Botelho could be that guy, but also Joshua Burnham's going to take some reps away from him. I think, and then guys like Junior Toyolamaka could also hope and think that he takes a few reps as far as, the overall number of total snaps. So I just don't think he'll quite get there from a career perspective, but regardless, he can still be a high-level impact player. It could still be a player that Notre Dame needs. Like, they need that guy.
Yeah. Next position, Ryan, linebacker. I think there's a lot of different ways we could go, but there's just so much uncertainty about this position, in my opinion, about who's going to play, who's going to get their shot. But I'll say this, they need somebody to break out at linebacker this year. And I'm not talking about one of the veterans. They need one of the young guys to force his way onto the field some way, somehow, to either take some snaps away or potentially, and this is where I'm going to let you kick off about your breakout player, because if you're correct and this guy breaks out, I think it impacts multiple positions, and I'll explain why. So why don't you kick things off?
And I think that that's part of the equation for me, is that it's a little bit of wishful thinking for me, and I think it could benefit a lot of other positions on this defense on the second level if Jalen Sneed could potentially be the guy at Rover and push for a potential starting spot. Because what that does is if Jalen Sneed is that guy this spring going into the rest of the offseason, into the fall, then maybe you're more comfortable about, hey, Jack, we still need you, buddy. We still need to get you on the field. So maybe we rotate you in at will a little bit more. Maybe we play you a little bit more inside. So I think that could actually strengthen the inside linebacker position, potentially. It can strengthen the depth, especially at the inside linebacker position. You get Jack Kaiser in a more of a role that I think is suitable for his strengths as far as being a downhill player and playing in a little bit more tighter spaces than playing out in space all the time. And then also I think that Jalen Sneed, man, he is a special cat from an athleticism perspective. He brings playmaking potential if he can be consistent at that Rover position. So I think it could impact multiple spots on the second level. And I think that Jalen Sneed, man, like he could provide you some upside at Rover that is reminiscent of Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah. Now, obviously, I'm not saying he's going to be as impactful as Jeremiah. Jeremiah was a Butkus Award winner, right? Like he was a great player. But could he bring some of the similar impact that he brought to that position? I think he could, because I think he is that type of talent. I think he is a special type of football player if he hits a ceiling, of course.
They're going to need more consistency from an execution standpoint, and he's going to have to play with more discipline than what we saw in the spring game, in the bowl game. But what you could see in that game and in the Boston College game and in the Navy game, he moves at a speed that just nobody else moves with on the field. He just does. And he brings an impact ability that just could be really special. And he has a lot of the athletic tools. I'd even argue he's more explosive than Jeremiah Wusu-Koramoah was. Just pure athleticism. Now, does he have the instincts and feel for the game that Jeremiah did? That remains to be seen. We don't know that. But I think you have to go back to Jalen Smith to find a linebacker that just had more twitch and explosiveness, just pure explosiveness than Jalen Sneed. I don't know if he's going to be that kind of player, but I think he's got that kind of athleticism. Sure. So now Jalen's got a lot of growing up to do that he needs to do, like a lot of young players. And ultimately, that's going to determine just how good he's going to be. How hungry is he? How much does he put in the work? What kind of is he locked in the weight room? Is he locked in off the field? Does he have the right attitude? Those are all questions that you have for young players, especially guys that come in with the big pedigrees. Sometimes those kids, and this isn't specific, like I've heard something negative about Jalen. This is just always a concern with guys like him that were the highly ranked guys. Do you have that sense of this is what I'm entitled to, or do you have that sense of this is what I need to earn? Sure. And if Jalen has, and again, this isn't specific to, okay, Brian, you're saying that because you heard something negative about, that's not what I'm saying. This is true for a lot of young players, especially guys who were highly ranked, and he was a 5-star recruit coming out of high school. If he doesn't have the sense of entitlement some of those guys have, and he has a hunger for, hey, if you want this, go earn it. That's my hope for Jalen. If Jalen has the right mentality, he is going to break out this year. There's no doubt. it's just I sometimes get concerned with kids like him of, hey, you need to play me, as opposed to, dude, go out there and force them to play you. And that's what I'm going to see from Jalen. If he has that ladder attitude, there's no doubt he's going to be a difference maker. And part of the reason Jordan Botelho may not break the school's all-time sack record at Notre Dame is because of a guy like him. Because you got this linebacker rover that all of a sudden you're shooting off the edge and he's getting 5 or 6 sacks, right? I mean, he just has that type of dynamic ability, right? I mean, here you want to say, okay, people asked this yesterday, right? What will you need to see to know that something is good? Here's what I will know. If Notre Dame's third down package against Tennessee State, because of the guys that have earned it, contains these 4 players, then I'm going to say this team has a chance to be special. If the third down package has Jordan Botelho, Josh Burnham, Riley Mills, and Jalen Sneed on it, then this team is going to be a freaky pass rushing team.
It's a lot of athleticism.
A ton of athleticism.
Yeah.
And so if those guys can force their way into those roles, then this team is going to be special, because there's no doubt Jalen Sneed has enormous ability, enormous potential. My only question is not even question. The one thing he has to prove is, are you hungry for it or not? Are you hungry for greatness? Or do you think greatness needs to be given to you because you're Jalen Sneed and you are a 5-star recruit? Right. That's always a question for every big-time recruit that comes here. Jalen Sneed or Jalen Smith, Manti came here with similar pedigrees, even greater pedigrees. But you know what made them great players? They were also hungry for greatness. They worked for greatness. They earned greatness. If Jalen Sneed has that same mentality, he will find greatness at Notre Dame, and it could be as early as this season, and we can start to see it this spring. And it starts to get you excited. It really does.
I'm starting to think about a poor offensive tackle that is staring across from him at Joshua Burnham, and then on the outside of him is Jalen Sneed, and you got to start making some decisions in your head,
because some kind of twist is coming. Some kind of thing is coming to me, man. It's
poor buddy, man. Poor buddy. That poor guard's going to have one of those guys in some type of situation. Yeah. Like, it's not a good situation for offensive linemen. Not a good situation, man. That's like a offensive tackle's worst nightmare, is that type of speed off the edge.
There's another young linebacker that I've got my eye on this spring too, Ryan, and he needs to get a chance as well. I put him very much in the Josh Burnham category of, I know he's putting in the work. He's a freaky athlete. It's just whether or not they're going to give him a chance to compete or not. And that's Nolan Ziegler. You're talking about a guy that we were hearing this last spring. Kid finishes first, and he ran so fast and ran so well last year that last year they ran in like groups, like D-line, linebackers, DBs. They ended up moving him to the DB group by the end of the year, because he just was smoking the linebacker so bad. They just wanted to push him more. And you're talking about a guy that's got a great work ethic, strong. I mean, you look at the offseason workout numbers. I was telling you about Josh Burnham. Nolan Ziegler is consistently the top linebacker in lifts and all the different workouts. He's up to 230 pounds. He can flat out run. You know, Ryan, you and I have seen some stuff from him, some practice stuff from him, where you're just like, this guy, again, like Jalen Sneed, this guy moves at a different speed than the guys they have on the field right now. He just does. Now, he was a freshman and didn't know the defense and blah, 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 but he's not a freshman anymore. You're talking about a kid who's 6'3 plus, almost 6'4, 230 pounds, and can absolutely freaking move. And so to me, these two guys both have potential breakout ability. The only question for me with Nolan is similar to Jordan. I think they're going to push Jalen. I think they know they need to get Jalen on the field if they want to keep him at Notre Dame. Look, if you bury Jalen Sneed on the depth chart this year, they know he's going to leave, and he should, to be honest with you. You know, why would he's not sitting behind a Jack Kaiser and a Maris Luafal at Alabama. They would clearly move him up above those guys, right? That's just, Georgia does that all the time. But I think they're going to push him. I don't have a doubt about that. The question is, will they give Nolan Ziegler that same chance? If they do, that could be a guy that I'm got my eye on for possibly pushing Marist at that will spot, and maybe even moving over to Mike potentially and being the next in line there. But I really would like to see him get that shot at the will, because he's every bit as athletic as Marist, but a more disciplined football player in high school, and a guy that has even more weight at the same age. And I would argue even a tad more speed. So he's a guy also that I have on my watch for this spring guy. He will be one of the guys, look, linebacker is going to be the position I'm going to be spending most of my time watching at practices. I'm just telling you that right now.
Yep.
You know, we'll watch some D-line stuff as well, but I'm telling you, I'm going to have my eye on linebacker position for sure. That's going to be one that I want to see.
There is a different type of linebacker that is steadily getting introduced to Notre Dame football, Brian. I mean, you mentioned Nolan. I mentioned Jalen. We're going to talk about the freshmen, obviously, here in a few minutes as well. There is a different level of athlete than what Notre Dame has been accustomed to on the second level that has been injected into this program over the last 2 recruiting classes. There's no doubt about it. At the end of the day, Nolan Ziegler should be playing football in 2023 because, like you said, 6'3 plus, 230 pounds, good athlete, played overhang in high school a ton, played out in space a lot, was a wide receiver. He has that type of profile to him. And from what I've seen, and again, it's just practice clips, we've talked about this, but he looks really instinctive too. He looks really instinctive. He looks like he sees the game at a pretty high level. So there's no excuse because, the excuse last year was freshman and needs to put weight on, right? Well, he weighs as much as Maris Lofau does now.
And Maris Lofau, yes.
Yeah, he weighs as much as those guys now. So if he doesn't play this offseason, there is an issue in that room. Like there's an issue.
It's not a player issue.
No,
in that room.
It's not a player issue. It's not a player issue because you can't look at what Maris Lofau did in 2022 with his lack of instincts and say, oh, but we can't play Nolan because he doesn't have instincts. Sir, did you see your will position in 2022? Did you see that? That was one of the least instinctive will linebacker positions I've seen in my life. Like, it was really bad football. It really was for the majority of the season. So that conversation and that excuse even gets thrown out the window a little bit. So if you can't find a way to play that type of athlete on the second level, then, I'm just feeling very defeated, I think is the word to put in parentheses there.
Yep. There's no doubt. There's no doubt. So one of those two guys has to break out. And again, breakout doesn't have to mean starter, Ryan. It could mean it. It just means you now have a rotation. You have an impact guys that you can turn to. And if you can give me that, then I feel – I mean, look, this is what you recruited these guys for, right? If you're constantly playing an older player, it's the same crap we said in the past. It's like if you're constantly having to trot out the veteran players because they know the defense and the young guys consistently can't learn it, then they're not the problem. So, well, how can Benjamin Morrison? Number one, Benjamin Morrison's dad played in the NFL, right? But also the cornerback position, great coach who coaches his players, very fundamentally sound, very technically savvy. Mike Mickens is one of the best in the business at what he does. We've said that time and time again. But also the corners play a ton of man coverage, especially the back. It's like, dude, you're really good line-up play man coverage. There's not a lot to that mentally. It's okay, there's a lot of technical work that goes into it, but it's a little different than what a linebacker has to do. It just is. I'm not saying cornerback is an easy position to play mentally. I'm just saying when you play a lot of cover one, you don't have to know as much as a middle linebacker or a will linebacker does. That's just the reality of it.
There's not a process to assignments, right? Like your assignment is that guy. Like you're telling that person, like, cover that guy the best you can. Yeah, you need technique behind that. But linebackers, their assignments is off of processing, right? Like process, there's my gap. Process, here's my player coming back across the line of scrimmage. Processing, there's my landmark and zone coverage. Like everything is a process for a linebacker. If you're a man cover corner, your process is, that's my guy right there, right in front of me. That's the guy that I cover. And
right. And now it's about the technique, the how you play the game. And that's where he was taught at a very high level early on. He came in with elite talent. Mike Mickens was like, okay. And that's the thing, though. Benjamin Morrison came in and the talent was obvious. And so Mike Mickens was like, I got to force the issue with him. I got to put in the work to get this kid ready. And guess what? First game of his college career, we saw it in that game, Ryan. We saw it against Ohio State. You're like, yo, this number 20 is different. I mean, you think of how good he was in coverage, Ryan. You watched the All-22. You saw how sticky he was in coverage, breaking up that pass over the middle to, I think, was it Harrison or Emeka? I forget which one it was. We had a great breakup over the middle.
I think it was Emeka.
Just an excellent, excellent player. So that's what good coaching does. I got the talent. It's my job to get it ready to play. And if it's not ready to play, that's not on them. That's on me. And that's what makes Mike Mickens elite. And that's where the other guys have to prove themselves. Because I'm sorry, Josh Burnham and Nolan Ziegler and Jalen Sneed are in the Benjamin Morrison category as talents. They just are. Athletic talents. They just are. Now it's about getting them ready to play. And if they do, and the coaches surpass our expectations and prove to be the guys that Marcus Freeman believed them to be when he hired them, this team is going to be really good because there's so much length and athleticism in the younger classes. Third one, Ryan, no brainer. We could have gone with Ramon Henderson, could potentially be a guy like this. It wouldn't shock me if, we're talking about Ramon. But when we talk about breakouts in the secondary, there's one guy and one guy only that is going to be the first name out of just about everybody's mouth that works for IB. And I'd be willing to bet in the chat too, if we just said to people, hey, you tell us which DB you think we're talking about, I guarantee you the guy that a lot of people would be putting in the chat is Xavier Watts. Because we saw it late in the year. Now a couple times took some angles, okay, he's still learning his position, but the play he made, the play where you're like, okay, he's going to be a dude. I'm never going to talk about moving him to receiver again. He got off the hash against, it was USC. He took a bad angle to the ball, so that's why he missed, and he mistimed his jump, so that's why he didn't intercept it. But him open up, flipping his hips and getting to the ball, you're like, okay, that guy moves at a speed that just none of the other safeties on this roster can move at. And he did that a couple times in that game. And that pass that he broke up over the middle against South Carolina right before that fake punt, field goal, whatever the heck that thing was, that was you're like, okay, there's not another safety on the roster that has the instincts and feel for the game and the athleticism to make that play. So Xavier Watts is that guy for me. Up until I'd say probably the Boston College game, I still want him to play receiver category. Those last 3 games of the season last year was like, okay, I'm done. No more receiver talk for me. This guy's a dude at safety. He's our breakout at safety, Ryan. Both of us.
Because I think that he can be a very impactful football player, maybe the most impactful in 2023 from the safety spot. Because I mean, for me, ideally, Ramon Henderson takes a step forward, but he's just very solid in his role, right? He makes some impact in his specific role as a football player. DJ Brown is specific and hopefully productive in his one role as a football player. Xavier Watts is the type of talent that could play both spots, in my opinion, right? Like he could be a field safety, he could be a boundary safety, because I think you can rotate him to the middle of the field. You could definitely rotate him down. And I honestly I'd be okay with him playing some man coverage at times in the slot. Like I think he has that type of upside. 100%. So he is the fully versatile player on the back end for Notre Dame that allows you to do a lot of different things. And if you get stuck in a look where, your field safety is in the boundary for whatever reason, because you can't switch or whatever or on the weak side of the defense, whatever it is, it doesn't hurt you because Xavier Watts can do both of those responsibilities well. So I think that his versatility, his positional flexibility on the back end, that provides a lot of upside for a defense. He can be that guy that can play some middle of the field. He can be that guy that can come down in the alley. He can be that guy that can play some man-to-man coverage. He can play too high and split field. Like he can do a lot of different things, and I think that that's why he could potentially have the highest impact of any safety on this roster in 2023.
I mean, Ryan, let me ask you this, okay? Let's say Notre Dame moves Clarence Lewis to safety, something I've been begging them to do. Let's say it happens. And God forbid, and I truly mean that because I don't ever want to see a player get hurt. So I'm not using the Lord's name in vain. I generally mean God forbid this from happening. But let's just say this is football, injuries happen. 2 weeks before the week before the USC game, right? The game before USC, Thomas Harper sprains his ankle. He can't play against USC. If you're going up against USC and I got Cam Hart and Benjamin Morris on the outside, and I have my 2 deep safeties are Ramon Henderson and Clarence Lewis, and my nickel is Xavier Watts, I'm feeling good. I'm feeling good about where Notre Dame is. Because that's a lot of dudes that can flat out cover. That's the thing. That's 5 former corners or receivers out in coverage. Think about it. Because Clarence Lewis and Ramon Henderson both would have began their careers as corners. Xavier was a wide receiver that could easily play corner, in my opinion, in some defenses. Not a cover 1 defense, but like Xavier Watts, if Bob Diaco is the defensive coordinator running the defense he ran in 2012, to me, Xavier Watts is a field corner, in my opinion. And so, to me, that's the potential for that unit right there. Is you want to talk about the reason you start getting excited now. And again, if Thomas Harper's not hurt, Now those guys are all playing safety, and now you can see why I say this secondary, if they make the right moves this offseason, starting before spring, this secondary has a chance to be special, in my opinion. It has a chance to rival, if not surpass, the 2018 secondary, which to me is the best secondary Notre Dame has had probably since 2002. And that's the Shane Walton, Vontez Duff, Glenn Earl, Jerome Sapp secondary. Like, to me, if they make those moves and everybody starts to kind of play to their potential and Xavier Watts breaks out, this could be Notre Dame's best secondary since 2002 as a whole unit since 2002. Right now, to me, that pick is 2018. That was the best secondary Notre Dame has had. What this secondary has a chance to have, Ryan, is every bit as good, if not better, in the starting positions. Number one, athleticism. Number two, much longer secondary than that 2018 secondary. And number three, way better depth than that 2018 secondary. So that's why I start getting fired up about it. But they need Ramon to get better. And in my opinion, one of those two needs to break out as a guy. And I think Xavier has a chance to be that guy. Because remember, one of my predictions for the bowl game was, I was like, Xavier Watts is going to make or was it the bowl game or the USC game? I was like, Xavier Watts is going to make 2 huge plays in the game.
I think it was the bowl game.
And he ended up doing it. He didn't end up picking the passes off. He ended up doing it. He had the big breakups and almost had an interception. You're like, okay, this is what you saw in film against USC. You're like, this guy is, because he is the cliche. And I mean this as a positive. There's just that term where you're like, is Xavier the biggest guy? No, he's 5'11", 190, 195. Not the biggest guy. He's not a 4'3" guy. He's probably a 4'5", right? He's not – there's nothing elite about him physically. Since high school, you just watch kids play. This kid's just a heck of a football player. Now, is he a very good athlete? Yes. Does he have good size? Yes. There's just nothing about him where you look and say, Xavier's going to go to the combine in 2 years and light the world on fire. I don't see that. He'll have good testing numbers, but he won't be like oh my gosh. He'll be closer to Lohi Gilman testing-wise than he will some of the freaky guys like a Harrison Smith who had a 3.8, in the shuttle, and just is
like
silly.
6'6" and the 3 cone. Yeah.
I mean, just silly stuff, right? He'll be more like a Lohi, 4'1", 6'8", 6'9", which is athletic, moves well. But you just watch him play around, and you're like, he's at 4'5", still gets the ball better than the 4'3" guy because he sees the game, and he's a really intellectually smart player that just knows how to play. And if you know Xavier Watts at all, you meet him, and this is a very shy, quiet kid. But as soon as he does this, which is the image of me putting on a helmet and strapping it up, a different personality takes over. And it's a confident, cocky, and I mean that in a good way, I'm better than you type of kid. And he doesn't care who he's going against. And in fact, the better you are, the more he wants to go whoop you. And you need that kind of mentality. And that's what gets me fired up about Xavier Watts, in my opinion.
Nah, man, he's from Nebraska, right? So you should expect him to be kind of that quiet kid,
he's
right?
Born in Minnesota, moved to Nebraska. I mean, but same thing, right? Yeah. Not big popular states, right?
He's your Midwestern guy, man, out kind of in the, I don't want to say middle of nowhere, but less populated type of states, right? So he's a non-assuming, quiet kid. And I love those kids though, man. It's like Brian Dawkins was a guy, Brian, right? Like he was a guy that was incredibly nice, just very lax kind of persona to him. But when he got on the football field, dude was a mad dog, man. Just absolute crazy.
Trey Polamalu is another example like that. Just high voice, very calm and polite. You see him in those commercials, the Head and Shoulders commercials, and he's just like this very nice guy with this high-pitched voice, and then you watch him play, and you're like, that's not the same dude that I see in those commercials. Like this guy.
John Lynch is another one, man, where it's like so nice, mild manner, and then on the field, he's going to knock you out, man. Yeah. And you need those guys. You need the guys that set the tone. You need the guys that bring that kind of persona to the field. You need those guys that bring attitude, man. That's the one thing I really like about Jordan Patello potentially this year, Brian, is I think that he's going to be very productive with the amount of snaps he gets, and hopefully he's a really significant playmaker. But the one thing I love about Jordan Patello brings to the game, and we talked about earlier in the podcast, is that he has an attitude to him, man. And defensively, you need more of that. You need more. When you need a play, those guys usually rise to the occasion. The ones that are a little cocky on the field, and again, not a bad thing, but super overly confident at times, the guys that want to compete.
Yeah.
And that's what I get out of Xavier Watts as well.
I like cocky football players. I don't like arrogant football players. Arrogant football players are disrespectful and tend to kind of get their comeuppance. I want a guy that's cocky. I want a guy that knows he's good and wants to show everyone how good he is, because that's a guy that is a money player. The arrogant guy just likes to talk just to talk, right?
Yeah.
And probably thinks he's a little better than he is, and thinks things should kind of come to. It's a different mentality. Some people, I think it's different. Yeah. So I kind of like that. So that's kind of going to do it for the breakout players around. We could. There's other guys. I think. JD Bertrand's a guy that I could see as a breakout in the fall. I don't know what JD could possibly do in the spring to be a breakout. What I mean breakout is I still think JD Bertrand's a good football player. I think he was underrated last year. I'm a believer that if the defensive coaching does what it's supposed to do this year, that JD is going to have a 10-plus tackle for loss. I really do. I mean, he had 8 last year, Ryan, and he missed basically a full game and a half because of the targeting stuff, right? Or a full game, excuse me, because of the targeting stuff, and including game and a half, because he missed 2 full halves, plus missed some time in the 2 games he got kicked out of. And so for me, Ryan, he's a guy that I could see as a double-digit tackle for loss guy if the defense is run correctly. That's more of a national breakout. That's not something we're going to see this spring. I don't know how you can see that in the spring from a guy like him. We could talk about Riley Mills. And I'm hoping that we're talking at some point in time in the end of the spring about a breakout interior guy that's not Riley Mills or Howard Cross. That's my hope. I just don't know who that's going to be. That's why I didn't go with anybody. I mean, I could have maybe put names in a hat and pulled one out and like, oh, okay, let's go with this guy. I just don't know who that's going to be. And it kind of is on line with what we talked about yesterday. They need the interior D-line to step up. There's a lot of bodies. I just don't know who's ready to be that guy, or hopefully those guys.
Right.
But the guys we talked about, I feel, are definitely some really good football players, and those are things that we want to see. And so there's other guys you could go with, but those are the players that we feel most comfortable with at this point in time when you look at breakouts for the Notre Dame defense.
No doubt about it. It's going to be very interesting. And that's, again, why this spring is so much fun, because you're optimistic. You have it's more a push to the upside, right? Like what a player can do and what they're starting to build as far as momentum. But at the end of the day, Brian, this conversation is important because Notre Dame needs some of these guys, man. They need some of these guys. So love to see it, want to see it, and it's only 6 days away. So excited for it.
Let's move on to the freshman class, Ryan. Let's go to some guys that we think could be ready to make an impact this spring. And honestly, the first place to go, it's easy. It's wide receiver. Notre Dame has 3 early enrollees on campus right now: Jaden Greathouse, Rico Flores, Braylon James. And those 3 guys, to me, all have a chance this spring to kind of break out. I think the first 2 guys, especially Greathouse and Rico Flores, are guys that could really make a push. And I think the freshman class is going to make an impact this year, whether that's they're going to step up and make plays, or they're going to push other guys to step up. Sure. Don't know which one it's going to be right now. But to me, I think this freshman class has a chance to make its presence felt. And this spring, there's no position where there's going to be a greater chance for that than at wide receiver.
And it was great to hear when you had your media availability that both Jaden and Rico are going to be good to go for the spring, right? Because they're the 2 guys that we have kind of established as 2 of the guys that we think could make the biggest impacts, because they are players that are a little more nuanced, a little more along as far as from the technical aspects of the game. Jaden Greathouse and Rico are both very good route runners. They're both consistent pass catchers. The one thing I loved hearing about Jaden Greathouse's media availability, Brian, is one thing that he said was, when the football hits my hands, I'm going to catch it. Like, I'm just going to do it, right? And there's a confidence there too. And I think that that's something that we need to talk about in that conversation, is that Jaden Greathouse and Rico Flores both, and Braylon James too, in this conversation, they're going to come into this spring ready to compete. Like, those guys are going to be ready to ball out and to put their best foot forward. And, I would pick Jaden Greathouse to be my guy as far as who's the breakout freshman wide receiver on the roster. But I think that you can make the case easily as for Rico, because Rico is far along from a development perspective. He has that type of profile to him. But ultimately, the reason that I think that you could see some movement from those guys, all three of them, is because, man, they are all talented in their own ways, but they're incredibly competitive. At the end of the day, that I think could separate them for me.
I think Rico's a guy that could really surprise a lot of people. I mean, he was rated third for me at receiver, fourth upside wise. But man, Ryan, you look at that kid play. We're talking earlier about cocky. Rico's that way, and I mean that in a good way. And Jaden Greathouse is that way too, right? When you look at the best receivers, more often than not, this isn't always true. More often than not, they have sort of an attitude about them, an arrogance about them, not arrogance, a cockiness about them, and just a swagger about them, where you're just like, and it's not even like, I'm not talking about the obnoxious stuff that we see from like the Miami guys, but I'm just talking about I know I'm good, and I know you can't cover me, and I don't have a problem talking about it. I mean, you listen to Jaden Greathouse talk, and he's not arrogant, but you're just like, dude, this guy is really confident in himself. Now, we'll find out if that's justified or not, but he's very confident in himself. And Rico is too. Rico does it in such an unassuming way, though. That's what I liked about, because that was the first time I've actually spoken to him. You cover recruiting. You've talked to Rico.
Yep.
That was my first time really talking to him, and you're just like, he's like just a fun. He's like, when he talks, he's always got a smile on his face.
Yeah.
Even when he's not saying something that he should be smiling about. I don't mean that like he's just explaining. He's just kind of got this like really like harmless smile on his face. But it's a quiet confidence that he has. And you're just like, I asked him this, for example. I said, and I loved this answer, and I'll have an article about it eventually. I said, so I know obviously, you work on all parts of your game. I said, but what are the things that you look at and say, this is what I got to really emphasize going into my first spring. And he goes, honestly, I got to work on all of it. He goes, because if I'm spending all my time working on this, but I'm not working on my pass catching, then all of a sudden, guess what? I'm going to start dropping more balls because I haven't spent enough time working on my pass catching. He starts to explain this answer of he's got to work on his whole craft all the time. Otherwise, it gets some parts. I'm like, this is such a veteran answer. You know what I mean? Like, this is such a great answer. And he didn't answer it in a way where it's like he's giving me some line about, well, I'm always working on all parts of my game, where it's just like, okay, dude, like, I'm trying to have a conversation with you. It wasn't like that. It was an engaging answer. And he gave an example of, what if I'm working on this, and then guess what? This part of my game's going to, and it was like, this is a great answer. This kid knows the receiver position. He understands
the process.
This part.
Yeah.
And that's what you love to see about a kid like that. And Jaden Greathouse is a very similar way. They're both advanced players, route runners. And Rico, Ryan, you could kind of see he's filling out a lot too. Like, he even said, like, we didn't do a lot of lifting, like upper body lifts in high school. And he's doing a lot. And his just, you're just seeing him fill out now.
Yep.
I don't know if they're going to play a lot, but I'm telling you right now, Dion and Tobias and Lorenzo and Jaden Thomas and Caleb Smith, it's not going to take very long for them to be like, yeah, I better bring it today, because these freshmen they're not messing around. They're really not messing around.
Well,
and that makes you better, in my opinion.
Well, Brian, I think we talked about this before, but I do think that there's a key conversation here for those three wide receivers, the three freshmen, that Jaden Greathouse played at Austin Westlake, which had a 53-game winning streak, which won 3 straight state championships while he was a part of the program. And he had like 50 career touchdown catches, right? Like, he was a part of a great program and a vital member of that program for 4 years. Like, he was that kind of guy, right? Rico Flores, who you just mentioned, with the Folsom High School out in California. And Folsom's one of the better programs in all of high school football as well. So those guys have been prepared for this moment. Braylon James played in one of the most talent-rich high school areas in all of high school football out there in the Austin area in the state of Texas. He was playing the Jaden Greathouses of the world on a week-to-week basis. when you assume all those things together for me, when you consider where these guys all come from, I shouldn't be surprised that they're all super competitive, right? I shouldn't be surprised that they all feel like they're prepared
why
for
you
this
recruit
moment.
those areas, Ryan. That's
100%.
exactly why you recruit those areas. Is you're getting kids that are coming with some attitude, and they've been challenged. I was speaking with somebody yesterday about a recruit, and he was just telling me, he's like, one of the reasons that I like this kid is because I have seen him line up against other dudes, and he competes his butt off, and he does well. And I was like, yeah, I get it. I get it. So you love that mentality of those kids. And so I'm looking forward to seeing what they're going to do. Another guy that I'm very curious to see what he does this spring, Ryan, in the freshman class. Because keep in mind, a lot of the freshmen are not on campus. Like Jeremiah Love's not on campus. Caleb Smith, the younger, is not on campus. Cooper Flanagan's not on campus. And 4 of the 5 offensive linemen aren't on campus. There's only one that's on campus, and that's Sam Pendleton. I'm very curious to see how quickly Sam can pick up the offense, because when you look at him, he doesn't look like a freshman.
No.
And he even mentioned when I interviewed him, he's like, I've lost a lot of my gut. I'm filling out here. And you could see it. And you could see the upper body starting to fill out, Ryan. Like, you're like, okay, we saw pictures of him in the fall when he visited Notre Dame, and you saw, 17, 18-year-old kid. He's got some baby fat. He's got a gut. He's just a big 300-pound kid from Carolina. I saw him in the spring. I'm like, that's not the same dude we saw taking pictures in the, his shirt kind of like, here's what you want to see from an offensive lineman. You don't want to see a shirt that kind of goes like this, right? So it goes down and then goes out. You want to see a shirt that's kind of just always out. And what I mean by, if anything, is out and then kind of comes in a little bit. Because what that means is the better shape a lineman gets in, the less, at least the guys that Notre Dame recruits, the more you see the gut kind of go in, and the thighs and the butt and the chest expand. Right. Like Alabama's made a killing with the guys with the big old guts and the big old midsections, because
LSU too. Yes.
It's just a different type of big, and it's a different type of offense. It's more short area power, movers off the line. Notre Dame needs athletes. They need guys that have the thickness, right? And so you look at the Zach Martins, the Quentin Nelson did not have a big gut. He was just huge, massive, everywhere. Aaron Banks is about the only guy that they've had, Tommy Kramer to a degree, that had any kind of real gut. You know what I mean? And it wasn't even bad there. And it's just that's what you see from Sam. And he looks like a veteran. Now, he's still a freshman. He's still got a lot to learn. I'm curious to see if Sam can kind of make some noise this spring and be a guy that can push the older players. And older meaning like the sophomores, the juniors, But he's an interesting cat because he is strong, Ryan, like strong for his age. He's another guy that I have my eye on.
Yeah, because, like you said, the one thing you knew about Sam Pendleton from just kind of the recruiting side and from his time, in his high school in North Carolina and Regan High School is that he is an incredibly hard worker. There's no doubt about that. Like he would post workout videos all the time where he's putting up like substantial weight, like not a little bit of weight, not like trying to show off weight, like legitimate weight that is preparing him to play at the next level. Like he's a little bit of a gym rat, and he always has been from at least, the time that I've known him. So I'm not surprised that physically he looks ready to go, right? Like 6'4", 300, 305 pounds, somewhere in that ballpark, and like a good 300 pounds. Like you said, it's not bad weight. It's turning into very good weight. And some other guys, Brian, on this roster are in some kind of vicarious positions. Because you think about like Rocco Spindler, for instance, right? Where it's like third-year player, some younger guys coming up. Is he able to kind of fend off the younger guys and get an opportunity to maybe potentially start? Then there's guys like Ty Chan, who's, only a sophomore, but still, you have a guy that's coming up 1 year younger than him. If Ty Chan gets supplanted by a Sam Pendleton in the spring and this offseason, then you're like, that's a tough spot to be in, kind of moving forward a little bit, right? So I think there's a lot of quality depth interior offensive line for Notre Dame, especially. Even you could throw in some of the, Ashton Craig at center, for instance, right? And those types of guys. But I think Sam this offseason has the potential to, can he vault some of the depth and get himself in a good position where if Andrew Kristofic is the starter this year, for instance, at one of the guards, going into 2024, does Sam Pendleton have an inside track to maybe being the next guy in on the other side of Billy Schrauth as the opposite guard? So I think that he has a chance to vault some younger guys this offseason as far as the depth is concerned. And, I think that he has the personality to do that, and he has the competitiveness to do that, but it will be interesting to see if he can kind of, clear some guys this offseason, or if he's just kind of, getting set in the ways and figuring out the transitional stuff. I have to think it's more the former, because I think that he has prepared himself for this moment, but it'll be interesting to see of how much of a leeway that he can create and how much impact he can have on the depth of the guard roster this offseason.
I think moving over to the defense is going to be interesting, Ryan, and some freshmen I'm looking forward to, because we have a big question mark about what is the interior depth chart going to look like behind the two expected starters, Riley Mills and Howard Cross. And a freshman, again, four guys signed in the 23 class. Only one of them's on campus right now. And the guy on campus now is Devin Houston, who I think you and I agreed is – I'll just say this because I think we're on the same. I'll say this and you can agree with me or not. He may not have the highest ceiling of all the D linemen, and we don't think that he does. Actually, he ranks at the bottom of my four in regards to if they all reach their full potential. He's fourth, and now they're all very good.
Yeah,
but he's probably fourth. But he, in my view, had the highest ceiling of all the four defensive linemen. The guy that I thought could be the most ready to play. He shows up at 285. I'm curious to see how he takes to Matt Balis, because if he takes well to Matt Balis' strength program, I could easily see Devin Houston at some point in time this season working himself into a rotation spot, and we'll start to see it a little bit in the spring, because if he's going to be ready in the fall, he'll at least flash this spring. He may not look like a world beater day one, but we'll see some flashes of like, okay, Devin was locked in today. He did some things. And then the next day, maybe not so much. That's kind of what you usually see from freshmen like him. I'm very curious to see what Devin Houston's going to do this year.
Because he has a clean frame. He's a longer kid. He's right around 6'4", but he's got good length to him as far as his interior position. And him at 285 pounds, Brian, is very promising, because I could see a world where he adds another 5 to 10 pounds this offseason going into fall camp, and he's 290, 295, and he might be ready to play, And ultimately, we've been talking about guys like Jason Onye now for a couple seasons, right? Like I remember last offseason, we were talking about developmental potential, and there's obviously upside there. But can Devin Houston vote a guy like a Jason Onye in year one? Is that possible? And if he does, he might be in line for some snaps this year. Right. Like that's the world that we live in, right? So he's going to have to beat out some veterans in that group, but I mean, I would say Devin Houston at 6'4", 285 plus pounds, a guy that played defensive end in high school, good athlete, has some physicality to him. If he's ready to play, let's get him some work, man, because the interior depth of the defensive line is not a great situation right now. It's not. Like there's a lot of question marks. There's more questions than answers. So if Devin can just give you a little bit of an answer, I think it's worth at least exploring the opportunity if he has a big spring.
So, Ryan, next level is going to be interesting, right? Very interesting, because for a lot of years, a guy like Jaden Osbury and Drake Bowen, they're going to be guys that are going to be able to make some noise. The interior depth chart at linebacker, the interior linebacker depth chart is not nearly as good right now as maybe some think from a number standpoint. And it could end up getting thinner by the end of the semester. So the freshmen aren't that far off, like you might think. So I'm curious to see what kind of moves and what kind of noise Drake Bowen and Jaden Osbury can play. Number one, I'm curious to see where they're going to play.
Right.
Like I won't be shocked if we see Jaden Osbury playing Rover, for example, this spring. I won't be shocked if we see Drake Bowen playing Will, although I'd love to see him just look. Who's your next at Mike? J.D. Bertrand's done after this year. I mean, who's your Mike?
That was going to be my question, is you don't know who that next guy is.
Right,
so
who's your Mike? So I want to see Drake get that shot. Just put him there. Just stop messing around. Stop cross-training freshmen. Just, let them get some snaps at a couple spots, but let them find a home pretty early and let them develop there, master that spot, then go work on another one.
Yeah.
And to me, I want to see Drake Bowen get that shot at Mike. And that's going to be a big one for me. Now, technically, JD could come back for a sixth year in 2024. I don't know why he would want to do that or why Notre Dame would want to do that. I mean, it's time for the kid to move on to the next tenure at this point in time. But I expect him to be a team captain again. So I understand why Notre Dame want to do it. Team captain, what he is, good football player. I just feel like if he has the breakout year I think he's capable of, Ryan, JD, go. You're not going to get bigger, taller, or faster next year. You just had a heck of a year. You've had almost 30 tackles for loss the last 3 years. Dude, just go. Don't risk an injury. If he doesn't have the breakout year that I think he can have, then there's no need to bring him back. He is what he is, right? Go with the younger, more talented player. So either way, I don't know if I'd want to bring him back in 2024 or if he should even want to come back in 2024. So you've got to get these guys ready to play. Could it be Nolan Ziegler, Mike? I don't know. But I want to really see where now Preston Zinter, we could talk about too. He's the longest of the group. I think Preston's probably more of a need a year to get in the weight room and develop and find his role. Maybe he could be the Mike. He could maybe end up being a Viper perhaps. So he's an interesting one. But I think Drake and Jaden are guys that I'm going to have my eye on this spring, Ryan, to see if these freshmen can kind of force their way into making some noise where, if Jalen Sneed let's say Jalen doesn't come in with the right mentality of things. Jaden Osbury is the kind of kid that could come in and start making plays. You're like, hey, bro, you better step it up, right? It's hypothetical. Again, I'm not saying I'm expecting that from Jalen Sneed. I'm just making a point. Let's say Nolan Ziegler isn't locked there, ready to really come in and compete. I expect him to. I'm making an example. Drake Bowen's kind of kid to say, hey, bud, you better step it up and be ready to go or I'm going to beat you out.
All right.
And I think that's great. I think that kind of competition, that kind of depth is great. And I just hope that those kids can pick things up quickly enough and be given a chance to make that kind of push. The spring is the perfect time for it, Ryan. It really is.
I think if they put Jaden Osbury at Rover and just leave him there as a freshman, I think he's good enough to play, man. Like, I think he could play in year one. I think Drake Bowen could play in year one if you had to as well. Like, I think both those guys are good enough to play football in year one of their Notre Dame careers. I'm very interested to see Jaden Osbury, especially from a body type perspective, right? Like, because right now he's like in that kind of gray area between Rover and Will body type, right? Like more closer to 200 pounds than 220 right now. Can you get your body up to 210, 215 before the season where now you're like, okay, you could throw him in at will and he continues to develop, continues to get bigger. And I agree completely with your first sentiment, Brian. It was my first question was like, after JD Bertrand, who's your heir apparent at Mike? I don't know who that guy is. Like, and this could be a great opportunity this season, whether Drake plays a decent amount or if he just redshirts this year, to get him ready to be that guy, right? Because you have to have a little bit of foresight to some of this stuff where it's like, hey man, second team reps, let's get Drake some work today. Let's get him some work at Mike, because after we lose a guy like JD who's been a 3-year player for us, we don't know who the next guy is, and put him in the same position as a guy like JD. Because the one thing that is great too, Brian, is that JD is a smart football player, right? He's a really smart, well-spoken kid. He could learn a lot from a guy like Drake Bowen could learn a lot from a guy like that. And then if he gets that mental capability, hey, man, now we're talking about a 6'2", 235-pound guy instead of a 6 foot, barely 230-pound guy, right? That's the evolution of the position, in my opinion. And I think that he can really get a lot out of potentially being that Mike in year one, because I think that he can be that heir apparent if everything goes well.
I'll bet you $1,000 that if Drake Bowen becomes a great player, you're going to hear him talking about the influence JD Bertrand had on him. I bet.
Oh, no doubt.
Guarantee it. Guarantee it. And that's where I covet a guy like JD Bertrand, because I feel like a guy like JD Bertrand understands that. It's like, I'm not just here. I'm not a captain just because of, I work hard in the weight room. Like, my role as a captain, I'm not only bound to do the best that I can do as a player, but to leave my mark beyond my time. That's what separates like the Quentin Nelsons, the Zach Martins. You want to know why Zach Martin continues to come back and work at Notre Dame and to work at the camps? It's not as a favor to Harry Heastan. It's a small part of that. He loves his former coach and all that, but it's, I have a legacy that I'm a part of, that I want to keep going. It's to this university and to this tradition. It's like, I want to be able to look back and say, I left a legacy beyond just my time as a starter. And when if JD Bertrand's able to make an NFL team in some capacity, in 3 years from the road, he's watching Drake Bowen battle for a Butkus Award job or a Jaden Osbury do that or Jalen Sneed or Nolan Ziegler, he's going to look back and say, I had a role in that and helping that kid develop. That's the duty that I have as a starting Mike linebacker, as a captain. I think J.D. Bertrand understands that more than a lot of kids do. I think the Notre Dame offensive linemen have understood that for a long time. And that's something that gives me some encouragement too. He does not strike me, and I could be wrong on this, he doesn't strike me as I'm not going to help you because you're pushing for my job kind of guy.
Right.
He just doesn't strike that. I think JD's confident enough in his ability to be like, I'm going to go do me, but it's my job to make sure, because what if I get hurt? What if I get kicked out again because of targeting? I'm going to make sure that the guy behind me is ready to go. Yep. And if he happens to be better than me, more power to him. But I don't think he will be. That's how JD strikes me. And I hope that Drake, because here's part of it. You can be that way as a captain, but that guy's the younger player's got to be receptive to that.
Yes.
You've gotten to know Drake Bowen a lot more than I have. He strikes me as the kind of kid that will be receptive to that.
Yes.
In my opinion.
He listens, man. He listens. You can tell some guys when you talk to them, they kind of hear you, but they're not listening. You know what I mean? Drake Bowen's one of those guys that you could tell is like intently listening to what you're saying to him. So I think that he would be a sponge. And I think Jaden Osbury would be a sponge too, to whatever position he's playing at as well. Like, I do think that they're very studious. Throw Preston Zinter in that conversation too. Like, I think all three of those kids are that way where they're going to listen, they're going to learn, and they're going to understand that they don't know all the answers yet, which is a key thing to know.
Last one for me, there's two positions. And obviously, Don Schuler's not going to get a chance to do anything this spring. He's recovered from the shoulder injury. The two DBs, Ben Minich and Christian Gray, I think both will have a chance to make some noise this year. Look, I'd much rather redshirt Ben Minich. I really want to redshirt Ben Minich. I want to create some separation between him and Xavier Watson or Ramon Henderson, who both have 23 and 24 as years of eligibility remaining. I want to see some separation there. But I sometimes feel like he strikes me as kind of kid where he makes it impossible. Like, I just I don't want to put him on the special teams, but how do I justify not put it? Like, I could see Ben Minich being that kind of guy. I really could. Yeah. The other guy to me that could end up making a much bigger impact than expected is Christian Gray. I have a feeling if Christian Gray has the right mentality, makes the proper mental adjustment, I think Christian Gray, Ryan, could be a guy that in a depth chart we say, well, there's not really room for a young guy to come in and push the way that Benjamin Morrison did last year. It doesn't matter. That Christian Gray could be that kind of guy. And I think we're going to start to see that pretty early on in his career. So I think those two guys are two more freshmen that could have a big impact. And I think Gray's could be more in the spring, because I think Ben Minich's impact would most likely be more of a special teams role. We won't see any of that this spring.
Right.
Like, we won't, I promise you, we'll hardly see any kind of special teams beyond like drills. We won't see stuff in the blue gold game. That's more of a fall camp type of thing. But I think Christian Gray is a guy that could have a chance to kind of come in and just make some noise early, because he's got all the tools, and he's one of the most battle-tested kids that Notre Dame signed in the 23 class.
He is one of the most instinctive football players in the class, one of the most battle-tested, to your point. I wouldn't be shocked too. It's not as easy as a trajectory as maybe being the heir apparent at Mike, but I mean, would it shock you if Christian Gray is the heir apparent to being the guy after Cam Hart? Would that be shocking to you? I wouldn't be shocked.
I think he's the heir apparent to both corners. And
sure.
let me explain.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is, I think he's the guy that kind of comes in and grooms behind Cam.
Yep.
And steps in for the starting lineup behind Cam. Then after 2024, when Benjamin goes pro, you see him slide into the boundary and take over the boundary. That's what I mean by that. Where he plays alongside Benjamin for a year, Benjamin goes pro, and then Christian slides over to the boundary, and he keeps that boundary corner thing rolling. That's what I kind of see. Right.
I could definitely see that. And one other spot I'd be interested to see if, because I agree with you. I think Ben Minich special teams is definitely the area early on that he can make the biggest impact, and that's not as highlighted in spring, like you said. But I would also be interested, Brian, because I know we talked about this a little bit, but the depth chart after the nickel position is an interesting one for me, right? Where you look at it and you say, Thomas Harper's the assumed guy. Clarence Lewis could play there if you need him to, sure. But is there any other guys that you really like playing inside as an extension of the safety position, right? Especially. And I look at Ben Minich and I say, I think that kid can do some stuff in the slot. I think he could do stuff in the nickel on top of, obviously developing as a true safety role. But I'd just be interested to see how the staff uses him in the spring. Like, do they like to look at him at the slot at all? Is he a guy that they're just going to play in that, boundary safety role so he can rotate to the middle of the field a ton? I'm just more interested to see defensively how they view him as a player, because I could legitimately see a world in a couple years where Ben Minich is your starting nickel cornerback. Like, I could see that absolutely, because I think he has that
nickel
short
slot,
area quickness.
like in the slot you're talking about?
Yes, yes. With that short area quickness, the click and close, the twitchiness, like he has some of that profile, I think, to playing in the slot a ton. So does he see a little bit of that in the spring? Is that something that they forecast him in the future, or is he playing exclusively as in one of the true safety roles? So I'm interested to see how they use Minich more than anything, because I agree with you. I think that his impact could be felt more on special teams in year one, especially.
Yeah, it's if those two guys are what we think they are, and we'll find out, that's where you start to say, okay, your depth is really good. Your depth is starting. I feel a lot better about my depth now than I did going into the spring if those two guys are there. Because look, here's the thing about these freshmen. We feel good about it, but we've never seen these kids playing in college football at all and practice and every kid handles it differently. Benjamin Morrison came in and from day one was like, yep, that dude's ready to go. Wasn't here in the spring. It just, everyone that you talked to last spring was like the day that he arrived. I even talked to a parent of a corner, and he was like, yeah, you could just see it. Like first practice, you can say that guy's just different. I mean, and that's what the great ones are, right? Like you could see it in Quentin Nelson the minute he showed up. Like, yeah, this guy looks different. This guy moves different. This guy hits different. Jalen Smith was that way. We've talked about last year. Tobias is that way. Jalen Sneed is that way. Nolan Ziegler's that way. And that's why we got so fired up yesterday talking about the young freshmen and sophomores, because since Marcus Freeman and Chad Bowden have arrived, they've been bringing in more and more athletes like that. And Mike Mickens has done that at corner. More and more guys where you're just like, this cat's different than what they used to land at these positions. And they've had to battle for those guys. But you look at Jaden Alsbury, like this cat's just different than some of the dudes that they've recruited in the past. And that's what you start getting excited. Now you need to hope that they can get comfortable early, that they can figure it out, that they can get strong enough and mentally strong enough and handle the academic workload and all that. That's the challenge for a freshman in Notre Dame. Is it's not just about the football piece. It's, dude, you got a calc final, on Friday before this big game against Ohio State, right? I mean, calc test or whatever. And that's what makes it different. And not all those kids can handle that early on. And so that's what's going to be interesting from the freshmen to see who can and cannot handle that role. That's going to be interesting. So, Ryan, that's going to do it for the breakdown of the freshmen. We're going to have a mailbag coming up next, and we've got some really good questions in there so far. So if you have some more mailbag questions, throw those in there now. We're going to get to those here in a second. But before you leave, please, folks, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. If you haven't already done so, please sign up for the message board at boards@irishbreakdown.com. We would love that support from you. If you've always wondered, hey, I want to support you guys, but I'm not really a message board guy. You don't have to get on. It's not like if you sign up and you join a booster club or something that I'm going to say, hey, you haven't been on the message board enough, you're out of here. If you've wanted to find a way to support us, that's a great way to do it. And honestly, it's better for us than super chats, right? Because we get a larger portion of the fee. We just pay the credit card processing fee, and then we get the rest, whereas Google takes, sometimes about half. It varies, what we see and what we think we should see and what we get. So we would greatly appreciate that, folks. You can find that at boards.irishbreakdown.com. You can either join monthly at $4.99 a month. You can join annually at $49.99 a year. Or if you just want to support us above and beyond and you're fortunate enough to be in that position, you can join the Shamrock, Blue, or Gold clubs as well. Those are $100 per year up. If you join the Shamrock or Blue club, you get a mug that's similar to this, but it says IB Club on it, and it only goes to club members. Nobody else has one. As you can see, I don't have one. And you'll get that. If you join the Gold club, then you not only get the mug, but you also get an IB Gold Club t-shirt. Ryan doesn't have one. I don't have one. Only Gold Club members have one. And it's our way of saying thank you for your support of Irish Breakdown. So you can find that at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Go to sign up, and you'll see those options there. We would love it if you would be able to support what we're building here and what we're doing at Irish Breakdown. And before we go, Elizabeth nails it. The IB Champions Lounge was my best Christmas gift. Elizabeth, thank you. Thank you. And you can do that. You can gift it for someone else. You just have to create a username and a password that you think they would want to use. And then you can pay for it that way and just make sure that you give them that login information. So you can certainly do that as a gift as well. It's mailbag time, Mr. Roberts, and I want to jump into it first. We have a super sticker from Nathan Milton. Nathan, thank you very, very much for that. We appreciate that. Let's dive right into these questions, Ryan. There's some good ones. I mean, you guys always give us good questions, but once again, some good questions. And we'll start off here right now with USMA.
This question is, will a freshman see meaningful time based on comment earlier this week, not looking good for defensive freshmen?
Well, I mean, yeah, if they handle things the way that they did last year, Ryan, then I don't expect to see a lot of freshmen other than maybe Christian Gray, right? I mean, that's just now I don't know what Chris O'Leary will do with a freshman, to be honest with you, because we've never really seen him with a freshman because they didn't sign anybody in 22. I'm trying to remember who in 21 they signed guys that just weren't. I mean, they just weren't guys that should be coming in and playing. It's Justin Walters and Kerry G, who were more down the road guys. This is the first time, we've seen him land a freshman that should be, have a shot to play. Mike Mickens got 2 freshmen ready to play last year to varying degrees of success. We've seen him do it before. Clarence Lewis started as a true freshman when Tariq Bracy got down. Clarence Lewis stepped in and started as a freshman on a team that went and played, made it to the playoff that year. So Mike Mickens has shown he can do that. The other coaches, the D-line, the linebacker coaches have not shown that they're able to get young guys ready to play. They have not shown that. Hopefully that changes this year. We'll see. But, look, what we want to be optimistic and we want to be excited. And I'm very excited about this team, but we also have to be honest. And I can't sit there and tell you, Al Washington's going to get those guys ready. I haven't seen him do it, right? I need to see him do it first. I can't tell you, Al Golden's going to make the necessary changes. And I hope those things happen, but I've got to see it. So we got to be honest about it too, right? Ryan, I do not like getting on here, and some people may not believe this, but it's true. You know this. I don't like getting on here and being critical. And this isn't. I would much rather be excited. I don't want that negativity, but I also don't want to be dishonest.
Yes.
And I don't want to paint a picture that's not accurate. I'm going to tell you what I think can happen, but also tell you what I think might be the stumbling blocks to that happening. If Al Golden and Al Washington do a good job of coaching this year across the board, this team is going to be scary good.
Agree.
Because those are the 2 roadblocks for me. I'm actually like the offensive staff. I really do. Now, is it this is what it's going to look like, and I'm happy here and I'm happy there. This is exactly what this is my picks. No, it wasn't. But I take that away, and you have to evaluate for what it is. I'm very optimistic about this offensive line or offensive staff. I came around on Joe Rudolph. It's a good football coach. Is he Harry Heastan? Who is?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? It's a good football coach. Gino Gaduli was, I think, a great hire as the quarterback's coach. I mean, a great hire in my opinion. Yeah. And Jared Parker's an unknown. He's an unproven as a coordinator. Here's what I know, though. He did a heck of a job last year at the tight ends. Well, he had Michael Mayer. Go watch Michael Mayer develop technically throughout the season. Do you know how hard it is to get a guy that's already a star to take the fundamentals of the game seriously as a first-year coach? I had trouble getting my star 1AA players to buy in that way. Imagine what it's like for a guy that's about to be a first-round draft. But you know what? He bought in and he became a much better football player. Overall, all-around football player.
And Michael Mayer brings it up like unprompted. Like you don't have to ask him about Jared Parker. He'll talk about the improvements under Coach Parker because of the respect he has for him.
Right. And Michael Mayer was blessed that he had, in my opinion, 2 good position coaches in his career at Notre Dame. I thought John McNulty did a good job, and I think Jared Parker took it to another level. McNulty, I think, helped him in the pass game. I think Parker helped him be a better all-around player. And I also know that his primary responsibility at West Virginia was red zone play calling. And the only good thing West Virginia did on offense in his 2 years was score in the red zone. Yeah. That's about the only thing they did well in his 2 years. They were in the top 20, I think, both years. And so that's all I know. So I'm cautiously optimistic about him. But here's the thing. He's surrounded by an excellent staff.
Right.
And you go back to where Tommy Rees was in 2020 and 21, and I don't think he was surrounded by a very good staff. I think Lance Taylor and John McNulty were good football coaches, no doubt. But receiver and O-line, bad football coaches, average to bad, right? Now, at the very least, he's got a good football coach at every offensive position.
Yep.
Minimum good football coach. And in a couple spots, he's got one of the best in the country with a proven track record. Gino Guidugli at quarterback and Dylan McCullough at running backs. Chancey's still developing as a coach, but first year was pretty good. Joe Rudolph, reputation-wise, one of the better offensive line coaches in the country. Certainly top 10, 15, right? Which is a significant upgrade over what they had the 2 times they made the playoff, right? Think about it. They have a much better O-line. Yeah, he's not Harry Hiestand. Harry Hiestand was never part of a playoff team.
And
those are Jeff Quinn years.
We can't judge a coach based upon an all-time grade either. Like, it's not fair, right? It's like, just because Joe Rudolph isn't Harry Hiestand doesn't mean he's not good. It's just that he's not Harry Hiestand.
Well, and some of the concern people have is because I expressed concern early on, and I think you did as well. But I was open enough to say, to trust the people that I know, that whose knowledge of the game I respect, to go dive into the film and to a degree give them the benefit of the doubt. One of the things that we were told, Ryan, by multiple people was, I know this guy, when he's not a coordinator, it's going to make his lines even better. And you break down the film and you're like, yeah, he wasn't working with the same kind of athletes at Wisconsin that he's going to be working with at Notre Dame. If we're going to be honest, especially the last couple of years when his lines weren't that good, in my opinion. They just didn't have the same level of players there. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Some of it you say, well, you got to recruit those guys, but I'm cautiously optimistic about the offensive staff. The defensive one is the question mark. Yeah. If they answer our questions and concerns appropriately and do a good job, Ryan, man, I'm telling you, this team's got a chance to be really good. And then we will then see the freshmen playing in some capacity, in some role, the freshmen and sophomores making an impact. And that ultimately has me excited because I want to root for Al Washington and Al Golden.
Right.
Especially Ryan, you know this. You and I have talked about this. I mentioned that you know how much respect I have for Al Golden as a person and as a coach.
Yep.
But I also have to be honest in what I see on the field. I can't let my personal feelings about him cloud that. He's one. I was sharing somebody. He's one of the few Division I coaches I ever came across in my years as a 1AA and D3 coach that ever showed the willingness to engage and talk ball and do those kind of things, right? Most of them are just like, well, whatever. And I love that about him, right? Mike Groh's another one who I have a great deal of respect for in that regard. And you want him to be successful. I want him to do well. I've been around Al Washington like twice. And in both times, you're like, but this seems like a guy that I would enjoy hanging out with, right? Like, and then you hear things about him, like, he seems like a good guy. I want him to be successful, but I also can't allow that to cloud my judgment and say, but he didn't do a good job. He's got to do a better job. And I hope that they do, because if those two guys step up this year, Ryan, I'm telling you, this team is going to be really, really good, really good. And that's where my excitement comes from, to be honest with you.
I mean, at the core, I mean, I'm a Notre Dame fan, right? So I always want the program to be successful. Like, I don't want anybody not to do well. It's just, we can't be honest and give legitimate conversation and legitimate, opinion if you aren't going to look at it and say it has to get better, right? Like, it has to get better because there is more talent than what was shown 100% in the 2022 season. They were still good on the defensive side of the football, but it wasn't nearly as consistent enough. And you weren't playing the talent at times in certain spots that you probably could have. So there has to be a willingness to play some of the younger guys. There has to be a willingness to grow as a coach, man. Like, at the end of the day, that has to be a thing that you harp on this offseason. And I hope they realize it, because I want Notre Dame to win a national championship. That's what it is. Like, I want them to win.
First, as a Notre Dame fan and as a business owner and someone who covers Notre Dame in your instance, like, it's good for us when that happens, So, hey, Ryan, I don't know if you're paying attention to if any of y'all are paying attention to what's going on in the NCAA tournament today, but West Virginia, I'm 0 for 2 so far, Ryan. I only did one bracket this year. I'm only going to do one. I did that for fun. I picked West Virginia to beat Maryland. Maryland came back and won that game. But then Furman beat Virginia.
Nice.
on a shot with like 2 seconds left. You have to go watch. Virginia guy just chucks it down the court like Hail Mary. Furman guy picks it off and hits like a like way like Steph Curry range 3 with like 2 seconds left to beat Virginia. Virginia's so outside of that 1 year they made the run to win a championship, Virginia just sucks so bad in the NCAA tournament so many times. It's crazy. Absolutely crazy. So wild start so far. So far in the NCAA tournament for those who are paying attention. I kind of got it on the, the side TV right now. So here we got one from Timeout Tom.
His question is, the move of Junior Tuihalamaka to Viper is still confusing. Was it because the coaches felt he was better suited for it and would be more impactful there, or because he wasn't hacking it at middle linebacker?
I don't know. I mean, look, Ryan, I thought he looked really good in the blue gold game.
Yeah,
I did.
It looked good in the spring in general.
It's wild because I hear that they say to him he outgrew the position, but then I hear that they're constantly telling Nolan Ziegler, put on more weight, put on more weight, put on more weight. You guys are like schizophrenic with your advice to players, So I don't know why they moved him to Viper. Maybe they felt they had the need there. I thought it was just a need for 2023. They didn't want to burn Josh Burnham's red shirt, and Junior was already starting on special teams. Maybe that was it, but I don't get it, Ryan. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me, to be honest with you. I don't think he's an every down Viper. I think he can flat out play Mike. And, again, if you have a defense that doesn't have a place for Junior Tuihalamaka middle linebacker already, then maybe your defense is the problem. But I still don't get that one. I really do not get that one, especially this early.
I think the answer to that question could both be no, Tom. I mean, honestly, and we'll never know the true answer. Well, we won't know the true answer to that in the immediacy anyway, as far as, why that move was made. But it is a little bit of a head scratcher because, I mean, literally we just had a conversation about who's the heir apparent at Mike linebacker, right? It's like it could have been Junior Tuihalamaka, maybe, you know what I mean? So very, very strange, especially when it happened. That was kind of the weirdest part was when it happened for me too.
Yeah. All right, let's go on to the next one here, Mr. Roberts.
Question from Christopher Galloway. Just random question. What was the best juke move by a Notre Dame ball carrier? I say Theo Riddick against USC in 2012.
I'm going with Lee Becton against Florida State in 1993. His dead leg juke was unbelievable. He was so slow, but his dead leg juke was a thing of beauty. So I loved his, because you're like, how is this guy juking cats from Florida State? I'm going to have to go with that one. That's my pick, Ryan.
I think Christopher might have hit it, at least ones that I can remember in my lifetime. It's that Theo Riddick shook USC, man. He got him great at that one. I mean, he really did. I'm trying to think of one that's even comparable. I feel like CJ Prosise got somebody pretty good one time, if I remember correctly. Like, I'm trying to remember who it was against. I feel like CJ got somebody pretty dang good one time. But, yeah, that Theo Riddick one was nasty, man. He made – and it's not easy to always make USC look kind of slow in certain spots, right? He made them look unathletic on that little juke. So
I'm trying to think of some others. I mean, Reggie Brooks had a couple nice one cuts. Yeah, CJ Prosise had I'm trying to remember what game it was. He had a really nice cut.
He had a little bit of that one cut, like making guys look stupid with the dead leg type of thing.
Torian Folson had a couple really nice jukes when he was at Notre Dame. Like he had someone
said Miles Boykin against LSU. I think Nathan Milton said it. That was a slow juke, man. That was a really slow.
That wasn't as much of a juke as just it was a wet field and the guy just couldn't catch his balance as much as anything else. But I
feel like Kyron might have had one in the open fields, maybe two. I feel like he may have had one, but I
have to go back and he probably did. I have to go back and watch some of those. But his were more like he had the best run by Notre Dame back. I mean, his run against North Carolina has to be in that conversation. If we're just not taking the juke part out of it, but his run against North Carolina in 2021 was pretty ridiculous.
I still love the still photo of that one where there's like 6 guys on him and somehow he still breaks out. It's like, come on, man.
Right. Got a super chat from Tyler Evans here. Actually, let me ask this one because this is more of an NFL question for you, Ryan.
Okay.
What do you think of the Carolina Panthers trading up to the number 1 pick, and who do you think they'll take? I hope they take C.J. Stroud. And this started a long conversation about this in the chat.
What do I think about it? For Carolina's side, I feel like it was a needed position. As long as it's a needed move, I should say, as long as there's a guy at the top that you really like. Because Carolina, I think, is a roster that has a lot of pluses to it. That offensive line really improved in 2022. The defense, you look at the defense and you say, J.C. Horn, Brian Burns, Derek Brown, Jeremy Chin, like there's a lot of talent on that defensive side of the football. I think that Carolina can compete in their division as long as they get competent quarterback play. And what they've done over the last few years is they've keep recycling veteran quarterbacks, man. You go from who was it first? It was Teddy Bridgewater, then it was Sam Darnold, then it was Baker Mayfield. Like you just keep going veteran over the last few years and it just hasn't worked. So I think Carolina doing something different, right? Different is sometimes needed. And I think taking the chance with there's going to be risk obviously involved in mortgaging those picks to get up to number one, but you had to do something different, man. You can't just recycling these bad veteran quarterbacks. You got to get it right at some point. I think, Tyler, for me, everyone thinks it's CJ Stroud. I think it's a CJ Stroud, Bryce Young conversation. Who do I want them to take? I think both quarterbacks can get the job done with what they need as far as competency in the position. Everybody knows that I'm a little higher on Bryce Young than CJ Stroud, though. I am. But I don't think CJ Stroud is the wrong answer because I think they need a guy that can function within the offense at a higher level than what they've had over the last few years. Because I think the infrastructure of the offense has a lot of merit to it. I think that you're going to be able to run the football. They just signed Miles Sanders as a running back who just coming off a 1,200-yard season for the Eagles. You have a strong offensive line, especially as a run blocking perspective. So I think when you look at it, I don't think there's necessarily a wrong answer. I would probably still go Bryce Young, but I think if it's Bryce Young or CJ Stroud, I think that it's a passable conversation for me because I think they both do enough in structure to really get that thing moving in the right direction.
My thing on that, number one, is if it's true, the reports are that they don't know who they're taking. If that's true, this is a stupid trade.
I mean, all that stuff that you don't believe after that.
Let me finish.
Yeah.
If it's true and they don't know who they're taking, that's a stupid trade. You don't give up what they gave up. They gave up a ton. You don't give that up and you're not convicted yet on who you're going to take. If that's nothing but typical draft noise of, we'll see, because maybe you can trick someone into maybe giving you even more than you gave to get there, right? Like maybe you can sucker the Colts into trading way up and giving up more than you gave up, and you get actually more in return, and you can still take one of Stroud, Bryce Young, or Anthony Richardson at 4. Okay, maybe, but you better have some conviction about who you're taking. And my thing is if they have conviction in who they're taking, then I have no problem with it because you can't win in the NFL without a big-time quarterback. You just can't. I mean, and I don't mean it doesn't have to be Pat Mahomes, but it needs to at least be Matthew Stafford. You know what I mean? And like, is Matthew Stafford a Hall of Famer? No. Is Matthew Stafford a really good NFL quarterback that finally won a Super Bowl the first time he played on a really good team where he didn't have to carry the team? Yeah, he did. And so you better feel good about that, and you better have conviction. And if you have conviction, then it is what it is. Take the guy and go get him. I don't love it. I think they gave up a ton, but it is what it is. If they have conviction, I think Bryce Young has the most talent of it, talent, mental, physical, and technical talent of any quarterback in this draft class. I think he's the best all-around package in that regard. I think Anthony Richardson has the most God-given ability and the highest ceiling. But to me, the safest pick is CJ Stroud, in my view, simply because the one big question that I have about Bryce Young is, can he hold up over a 17-game season at that size? That's a legitimate question for me. And people say, well, didn't Kyler Murray just miss games this year? Like, he didn't hold up this year. So now they're different players, so that's my only concern about Bryce Young. If I had confidence that Bryce Young was going to hold up, then he's my number one pick. I think CJ Stroud could still end up being the best quarterback in this class if what we saw against Georgia is who he's going to be. The version of CJ Stroud we saw against Georgia, in my opinion, is the best quarterback in this draft class. The problem is we didn't see that enough. We saw him eat up an unathletic, bad Big Ten. That's what we saw. He played 2 defenses this year that athletically could play with Ohio State, in my view. 3, in my opinion. Sorry. In the regular season. Ohio State, Notre Dame, Penn State, and Michigan. and he didn't necessarily play great in 2 of those 3 games. And I don't remember. He played well against Penn State, I thought. Didn't play very well against Notre Dame. Made some money throws, but he didn't have a typical C.J. Stroud game, and he didn't play great against Michigan. That's my concern. Now, he lit the world on fire against Georgia. I mean, he put that team on his back. But with Bryce, we saw that all the time. That's my thing, Ryan. We saw stuff like that from Bryce Young all the time. And that's why, I think Bryce is why I say what I say about Bryce. I just don't know, I just don't know if he can hold up. I'm in a 17-game season, plus you got to win 3 to win a championship. That's my big concern on Bryce Young at this point in time.
I think his style dictates that conversation for me a little bit, right? It's like Kyler Murray gets beat up, not because he's bad in the pocket. He gets beat up because he runs too much, right? Like that's kind of he doesn't know how to protect himself. Bryce Young, I think, will be able to protect himself. He's not a runner. He's a pocket passer.
But you're gonna get hit as a quarterback.
Sure.
You're gonna move around. Look what Drew Brees. He's not a runner. He has his shoulder knocked out, right? I mean, and that kind of ended his San Diego career. My point is, and Drew Brees was thicker than Bryce Young was, especially relative to that age. He's a more thickly built guy. You can say, well, he's not a runner, but you can't avoid contact in the NFL. You're going to get knocked around in the NFL, whether you're a pocket passer or a throwing guy. You can make the error of focusing too much on a guy's size. I think that's been happening in the NFL for decades. You can also make the error of not putting enough into it and not taking enough thought of, okay, but can he hold up, especially for a guy that's being picked that high? That's my thing. You shouldn't make it an end-all, be-all where I'm just not going to draft him because of size, but I think you can also make a mistake of just dismissing it and pointing to a couple anomalies as examples. Why? Because sometimes you could argue the athletic guys can actually take less big hits because they can make people miss and they don't take as many direct hits like a Russell Wilson, for example. So I just think that you have to be able to look at that and hold up. And especially since he was a starter for 2 years, Ryan, and in one of those years he got hurt and missed time. And missed a game, came back, missed part of a game, then missed another whole game, and wasn't quite the same guy for a couple weeks afterwards. So it's not like you can say, well, he held up in the SEC, because he didn't. He did get knocked around and get hurt, knocked out of a game. I mean, you can make that face, but he missed a game.
But it was nothing serious, though. It's just nagging injuries. But it's not like he's tearing ACLs. He's tearing up his shoulder.
That's the whole point. He missed a game, and he played 5 fewer games this year than he would in the NFL. So he did miss time. He did get tackled and landed on his shoulder, and it popped out. That's the whole point, right? You can't just ignore that. You can't just say, well, hey,
not ignoring it.
You've got to be able to look at that. If you are confident as a coach that he can hold up, then he's the best quarterback in this draft class. Sure. And that's the decision that I think these teams have to make. And I'd say, Ryan, I don't know if it's that close if you're confident he can hold up. Right. I don't. I think he's, to me, the clear guy if he can be that. But that's a big if for me. When you're investing, the money you're going to invest in the number 1 pick, it's a big if.
Sure.
But then do you trade all that up, Ryan, to take the safe pick? That's the flip side of this coin, right?
I think there's 2 really good options at the top potentially, though, which is why I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing if Carolina doesn't know with what they want to do. They put themselves in a position that whoever they ultimately do think is the better player, they're going to be able to take him. So if there's 2 really good, we've seen classes where there's 2 really good quarterbacks at the top. Like it's not just like usually one and then one guy sucks all the time. Like there might be
kind of sometimes turns out that way.
What's that?
It sometimes a lot of times turns out that way, though.
It can.
You see it. I mean, Peyton Manning and Ryan Leaf, there's this debate who's better, and everybody looks back and says, oh, but at the time it was a legitimate debate that people were having. You look at the what was it, 98? Was it 98? No, it was 99, 2000, whatever the year it was. Tim Couch and Akili Smith and Donovan McNabb, and like 3 of those guys, 2 of those 3 guys turned out to be huge busts. Mm-hmm. So what are you're already looking now like the Trevor Lawrence class, the number 2 picks already kind of, Well,
I could have told you that was going to happen.
Right. But see, that's the thing, though. I mean, you and I thought that we were in agreement on that, but clearly a lot of NFL teams and NFL scouts didn't feel that way, which is why I will contend the NFL still, by and large, sucks at evaluating quarterbacks. I mean, there's an NFL team that thought Mitch Trubisky was a better quarterback than Pat Mahomes and Deshaun Watson.
Unfortunately, there was probably a couple NFL teams that thought that. It probably wasn't just one. So
there was at least one NFL team that thought Christian Ponder
yeah.
was a first-round NFL draft pick. So, it's just going to be part of it, man. It makes it very interesting. All right, let's get down to some more, Ryan. Here's another draft question that a lot of people have had, so I'll ask this one from Archer452. D. Troll Hunter also asked this yesterday.
Yep.
It says, with Jalen Carter, that's the D tackle from Georgia, for those who may not know, with Jalen Carter's less than impressive pro day this week, how far does he realistically drop in the draft? So you can answer that question directly, Ryan, and then I want to hear your overall thoughts on how a pro day performance like that should impact a prospect or not. I mean, I'm curious to get your thoughts on that.
So, I think for me, the pro day is something that can be overemphasized at times and not talked about enough at others. Like it's a weird kind of scenario there. When I saw what happened yesterday, 9 pounds heavier, was cramping up during drills, not able to finish some stuff. I honestly didn't overreact like I think some people did because, again, this is his fault that he's dealing with all this stuff off the field right now. So I'm not excusing it, but that's a lot to deal with as a 21-year-old man. So mentally, maybe he just isn't in it right now as far as still trying to figure out the off the field stuff, right? Ultimately, I think that he's not going to fall as much as some people think. I've seen middle of the first round, end of the first round. I've seen some people mocking him outside of the first round now. I still don't think he gets out of the top 10. I don't. And that is but I will say this, that is very dependent on the other part of this process, because it's not just the pro day, it's not just the combine, all those types of things. Teams now are going to be doing even more deep diving into Jalen Carter's backgrounds to understand if these red flags have something to merit to them or if it was just one very bad decision that this young man made. That's going to be the biggest thing, because people don't know this, but NFL teams hire private investigators for this type of stuff. They will go deep into the backgrounds. We'll talk about the legality stuff. They'll talk about family history, social media, all that stuff. The NFL teams will have as much data points on him as they ever will. And honestly, before this, if this stuff never happens, I guarantee it would have been a very brief background check. Okay, cool, check. He's a great player on the field. We're taking him, right? Now what Jalen Carter's done to him with these bad performances is that more and more people are going to start looking at him further, right? He's got more of a target on his back. It is going to be a very intensive background check on Jalen Carter. And I think that the team opportunities from the top 30 visits is going to be a big opportunity, because at the end of it, I think NFL teams are going to look past it if they're comfortable with him as a person and he's able to fully make sense of the mistake that he made. I do think that he has the opportunity to do that. But there's another side that maybe this is a character flaw that he has. Maybe this is something a little deeper than just one really bad decision. I don't know the answer to that, but ultimately I don't think it affects him as much as people think, because I have never heard before this, outside of the Todd McShay thing, from people in the know that had serious concerns about his character. Maybe I'm not informed enough on the decision or the opinion to have, but I don't think that he falls as much as people think. So I still think number 10 to the Philadelphia Eagles is probably the floor for him as it stands. I
personally, and you may disagree with this, Ryan, I personally do not care about a pro day performance for a 320-pound defensive lineman. Do not care. You know who else had a really bad combine and pro day performance? Ronnie Stanley.
Yeah.
And he's been pretty flipping good. I just don't care. Now, do I like a good performance? Yes. Does a bad performance for a guy who's as dominant as this kid is on film the last 2 years bother me? It doesn't. If he checks all the boxes for me, and you talked about digging it, look, he made a horrible mistake.
Yes.
And I think Jason Smith said it. Was it a bad decision or a pattern?
Exactly.
That's what and I think Jason nailed that in the chat. That's what you find out. If it was you made a stupid decision and a very immature decision, and it had costly implications, that's something that he'll have to live with. Jalen Carter will have to live with the rest of his life, but it shouldn't define him if it was an isolated lack of maturity. That's my whole point, Ryan. If he gets past this, and hey, look, overall, he's a good kid. He went to class. He did what he needed to do. He's a good teammate. He didn't get in trouble beyond normal dumb things. I got to, because the speeding thing it is a pattern. The speeding thing is something he's been in trouble for before. That's different than a kid. That's bad, and it's tragic and it costs someone. But that's not like he's not Lawrence Phillips, right? Like that's my point. And should be treated like Lawrence Phillips. You also want to know that this is a kid that's going to be smart enough to learn from that. And I got to feel like if his only issue is he's immature in speeds and which is idiotic.
Yeah.
You got to feel like this kid just lost a friend because of it. I got to feel like this is going to be a life-changing thing for him. So
that's why I don't put too much weight into the pro day in general, Brian, because look, man, he's dealing with a lot of stuff right now, man. Like, because honestly, this could be this. It could be quite this, right? Is that Jalen Carter is a really good young man who made a terrible decision. And like you just said, he just lost a friend. Right? Some guys mentally
there's no punishment that you can
out.
give him worse than that. That's the reality of it, right?
And that's me cutting him a little bit of slack. I don't know him personally, so
for the pro day, it's me cutting him slack for the pro day. I'm not willing to judge who he is off the field because I don't know enough.
Yeah,
the NFL will figure that out.
Exactly.
Right. So the 2 speeding instances are huge red flags for me. If those are the only red flags, then me and him are going to have some heart-to-heart conversations as an NFL franchise. But I'm not going to drop him out of the first round.
Right.
Unless he's just like, I don't care, I'm going to keep doing it. Oh, okay, well, sure, you're going to do that, but we're not, that would be the only thing. So the character stuff is going to matter more to me if I was an NFL team than the pro day. I just don't care about his pro day because you know what I have? I have a whole lot of film from his last 2 seasons that tells me this guy is a Quinnen Williams, Deron Payne type of elite impact player at the next level. And I'm not letting that go because of this, if this is an isolated thing that he's learned from and moved on from. If there's a pattern of bad decisions, then I'm not investing that kind of money because then he could end up being, we could name other guys that had elite talent that ended up not panning out because they made bad decisions in life.
Sure.
Right. And so those are the things you have to look at. So a really good one. Here's another one from Archer 452, Ryan. It goes, Fox is, what's that?
I was going to read it. You did though. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to ask you because I know you have to leave here soon, right?
Yes. Yep.
So I wanted to give you a chance to answer this one first.
Sure.
Fox's RJ Young listed the top 5 quarterbacks rooms as 1 USC, 2 Ohio State, 3 Notre Dame, 4 Texas, 5 Tennessee. What would your top 5 rooms be?
I actually don't hate that top 4. I mean, maybe I would mix up the order a little bit, but I don't hate it. I'm trying to think because Tennessee's not one that I would have in there. I wouldn't have Tennessee in there. No
Ryan, I cannot have Ohio State number 2 right now. Now, they have a talented room, but it's an incredibly unproven room.
Well, but how are they ranking this though? Are they saying by is it just a projection thing?
I don't know
talent.
I don't know what the rank. I can't. There's even talent wise, it's not number 2 to me. And you know me, I'm a big Kyle McCord guy. Yeah. But even that regard, okay, if you're going to go there, then there's a lot of other teams that you should rank higher based on just talent. You know what I mean? So if you're going to go just pure talent projection, Clemson is ahead of Ohio State for me because Devin Brown and Kyle McCord is not as good to me as Cade Klubnik and Chris Vizina, for example, if we're just talking pure talent, right?
Yeah.
So I have a hard time putting Ohio State number 2. Now, I also am not one of those people that overreacts to where Ohio State is at quarterback. I think Ohio State's still going to be pretty darn good at quarterback, in my opinion.
Sure.
Moving forward. But I can't have Ohio State 2 right now. That's a big leap for me when you look at teams that have more proven players. So I'd have Texas ahead of them right now. You say, well, Quinn Ewers wasn't that good. He's still better than anyone Ohio State has had so far. And he could, you know what I mean? So far. Yeah. Now that may change this year. I would not be shocked if Kyle McCord ends up being better than Quinn Ewers, but I think Arch Manning is better than Devin Brown. So I couldn't have Ohio State there. Part of me wants to put Notre Dame number 2, but when you're dealing with a newcomer, you never quite know how a guy is going to be at that job. So I mean, there's a lot of conversation that I would want to have. I have a hard time with Tennessee at number 5, but then the question is who would you? LSU's got to be in there. First of all, LSU has to be a top 5 quarterback room, in my opinion. When you talk about, you've got Jalen Daniels coming back, you got Nussmeier, who's your number 2, who could start for a lot of teams, in my opinion, and you signed Ricky Collins this year. To me, that's a top 5 quarterback room right now, in my opinion. some people like right now, Jay Daniels is a better quarterback right now than anybody Texas has.
Yeah.
In my view,
Sure.
right? Anyone that Ohio State has right now, in my view. So I think you got to put LSU in that conversation as well. I'm curious because your face on that was interesting. I'm curious what you think about the LSU one.
Oh no, LSU makes a lot of sense. My face went like that mostly because I saw someone say Oregon in the chat, and I think that one makes a lot of sense too. Because I mean, look, as much as pushback as I have against Bo Nix, he's incredibly talented. There's no doubt about that. And
he played well this year. I mean, he did. He played well this year.
He had a very good season. Yep. So you have him. The Ty Thompson kid hasn't played, but like that kid's talented. He's talented. He's a big, talented kid. And then they have what's his name?
The kid they signed,
Dripping
Austin
Springs,
Novosad.
Yeah. So that's a good room. That's a good room.
I'd look at them. I think Ole Miss has a really good room right now. I mean, it's a lot of untapped potential, right? I mean, you talk about Spencer Sanders as a proven player. Jackson Dart's a talented player. They got who was the other grad transfer they got? They got another grad transfer. Right? They got a pretty decent freshman coming in. No, I thought they got two grad transfers.
The LSU kid.
The LSU kid. Did Walker Howard.
Walker Howard.
Yeah. Walker Howard. So Ole Miss has a pretty good quarterback room, in my opinion.
That might be one of the highest as far as just raw tools. Like that's a toolsy room, man.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you a team, Ryan, that for me has an interesting one that maybe not a lot of people are going to talk about right now. But a team that I think could end up having pretty good quarterback play in the next couple of years if they can kind of get it going. I think Texas A&M has a shot to have a pretty good quarterback room if Connor Wegman's as good as I think he can be.
Yeah,
I really like Connor Wegman as a quarterback. I think he's a really good quarterback. They've got some other guys on the roster that they've had a lot of guys transfer out, but they could have a shot moving forward to kind of have that. I think Alabama's quarterback room is very overrated, in my opinion. So there's some rooms in there. I think from that list, Ryan, I'm definitely going to have USC in the list. I'm definitely going to have Notre Dame in the list. I'm definitely going to have LSU in the list. After that, Ohio State is questionable, top 5 right now.
Yeah,
because number one, they don't have anybody past the first 2. That's the other problem, right? The kid from Washington, for me, he's good, but he doesn't do it for me. I'm sorry. Not the kid from Washington. He's from like Utah or Idaho. The kid that was committed to Washington that they flipped.
Oh, South Dakota.
You know what I'm talking about? Yeah, South Dakota. There you go.
Yeah.
Tennessee definitely doesn't do it for me because I don't think a whole lot of Joe Milton. Yeah. And Nico's very talented but raw. I can't put them in the top 5 just yet. Same reason I don't put A&M in there. I'm just talking about teams down the road. So
sleeper team. Wisconsin got the grad transfer from SMU, and they got Nick Evers in the portal this year too.
Yep.
So that's
Mordecai, Nick Evers.
Yeah.
And
I don't know who else is on that roster.
Yeah, but I'm curious who they signed. Did they sign a quarterback in high school this year? I really like Nick Evers, Ryan. And you and I have talked about that one before, the Texas kid. I think he's a good football player. I thought it was a good pickup for Florida when they got him.
Yeah.
He was a great Dan Mullen quarterback. He would have done very well if Dan Mullen was still at Florida. Yeah. Very well. So I'm curious, who did Wisconsin get in the 23 recruiting class?
I don't even remember a name.
Yeah, I don't know who that kid is. Some kid from Colorado that I never saw. So there's some good quarterback room. North Carolina needs to be in there. I don't know if you've ever seen him. They got a red shirt. He'll be a redshirt freshman next year that I love. Kid from Alabama named Connor Harrell.
Okay.
I like that kid a lot. And of course they have Drake May as a starter. So I like Connor Harrell a lot. I think the Criswell kid transferred out.
Yeah.
And then they got a freshman who's he's got a big arm. He's kind of raw. Tad Hudson's a raw kid, but he's got a big arm, kid from Carolina. So I like Carolina's quarterback room as well. I do. I think they have a good quarterback room also. So there's some good quarterback room out there, Ryan.
Did Brock Glenn end up at Florida State? Was that where he ultimately signed with Jordan Travis? Brock Glenn, the Tennessee kid?
That's a good question. I think he did. I think that's where he ended up. Yeah, but who's the backup right now to Jordan Travis? Who's the other quarterbacks in that roster?
Tate Rodemaker or whatever his name was. Okay. He actually played pretty well in relief, I thought.
He's all right. Yeah. I wasn't a huge Brock Glenn fan. He's got talent, but he's kind of
Kid's got a hose though, man.
He does, but he's just not a natural. I mean, he's a barely 50% thrower. I mean, he's that guy that just looks great at a camp. He's a lot like Brendan Clark. Looks great at a camp, but just not a great feel for being a quarterback. So meaning super high ceiling, super low floor is really what he is. So that's not the 5 I would go with. I don't know exactly what my 5 would be, Ryan, but
Joe Medina said we're sleeping on UCLA. I mean, I love Dante, but I'm not big on the Schlee kid that transferred from Kent State.
No,
so,
you got to have a great in this. This would be my one sort of since I'm not big on Malachi Nelson, USC's a little, but between Miller Moss and Malachi with Caleb, you got to have more than one quarterback for it to be a great quarterback room.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like Sam Hartman isn't the reason that Notre Dame is in the top 3 in quarterback rooms, in my opinion. I truly believe that. It's him plus Tyler Buckner, plus Kenny Minchie, plus Steve Angeli.
Yeah.
That's what makes a good quarterback room. You got to go at least 2 deep, in my opinion. And that's what I like about LSU. They're not in the top. I don't think Jaden Daniels is a top 5 college quarterback. I do not think that at all. No. But him and Nussmeier and Ricky Collins makes that, to me, a really good room.
Right.
That's where I'm at. And who has a very underrated quarterback room, Ryan, is NC State for that league. Because you got the freshman that played last year, the kid from Atlanta.
Yeah.
Morris. And then you have the Finley kid. I think they're all still there, correct?
Yes.
So that's for now. Again, is it top 5 national? No, I'm not saying that. But in the ACC, that's a pretty good quarterback room.
I thought MJ Morris looked really good in the opportunities he got last year before he got banged up. So I like him, man. Ben Finley actually did a good job too, coming off the bench.
He did. Right. I mean, if that's your number 3 quarterback, Ryan, you're pretty good. You're in pretty good shape. That's my point, right? Washington doesn't have the depth behind Penix to be in that conversation for me. I don't think they have the depth behind
I don't even know who's behind. Who do they have? Dylan Morris still? They still have Dylan Morris?
He transferred.
Did he?
He went to like Cal Poly or something like that.
Oh, no, that's Sam Heward. I was talking about
Sam
Morris
Heward did?
kid.
Okay. Yeah. I don't know if Dylan Morris is still there or not. I'd have to go look. But yeah, there's some good quarterback rooms out there. There are. So I can't put Tennessee in there. I don't even love Texas being in there, to be completely honest with you, Ryan. Based on some of the other rooms we talked about, like a
lot of unproven. A lot of unproven.
We're basically going off recruiting rankings with Texas at that point in time. Same with Ohio State. We're going off of recruiting rankings, and sort of the trend of Ohio State just kind of keeps pumping out good quarterbacks. I mean, I think that would be your ability to put Ohio State in there and say, look, man, they got a track record, and that's a legit argument. They have a track record of whoever starts puts up big numbers, and that's fair. That's fair. But I still got to see it to a degree. Where USC, Notre Dame, LSU, Oregon, Ole Miss, those are rooms where North Carolina, we've seen kids from that room play and be successful, at least in one spot. And that's where I would be.
I'm very curious to see what Spencer Sanders looks like with Lane Kiffin, man. I feel like he's going to put up some stupid numbers, but we'll see.
I mean, if Matt Corral can put up numbers in that offense, then I think Spencer Sanders can put up numbers on that offense.
For real, though.
I don't know if Jackson Dart will still be a part of that room moving forward, but even him and Walker Howard's a pretty good room. And I don't love Walker Howard as much as others, but I think Walker Howard will be a lot better at Ole Miss than he would have been at LSU, in my opinion, because of who's coaching them, in my view. And I think Clemson's got an underrated room now that Cade Klubnik is there, and you bring in Chris Vizina. The depth behind that's not great, but that's not a bad room right there. Not top 5. But it's definitely in that conversation. But
Zena has a rocket for an arm too, man.
Yeah, he does. He does. He didn't make the jump as a senior I'd hoped that he would make, but the tools are, and he's a good athlete for that size.
He can move. Yeah, he can move.
Yeah, he's a good athlete for that size. So I'll tell you one team that's not in my conversation, Oklahoma. That's for darn sure. They're not in my conversation.
Yeah.
So, all right. So you got some more. Ryan, do you got a run or do you got time for a couple more here?
I can do another one.
Okay, let me see. Let me find a good one here real quick that maybe might be good for you. So let's see here. All right. Here's an interesting one, Ryan. We'll bring this one up from Crystal Rose. Crystal has one here. So I'll read it. You can answer it. And then when I start to answer, you can take off.
Okay.
And he said, what player on the 23 team has the best Notre Dame career? And then what player on the 23 team will have the best NFL career when it's all said and done? I feel like the latter one is easier for me to answer than the first one.
I think the answer is the same for both of them.
Could be
me.
both.
I think it's Joe Alt. I think it's Joe Alt. I mean, Crystal, honestly, if he leaves after his junior year, he has a chance to be a 2-time All-American, right? Like a 2-time All-American. Technically 3-year starter. I mean, I'm going to give it to him because, he took over a few games with him, right?
Well, and they sucked when he wasn't starting and became better when he did start. So,
yeah. And it'd be so good in that 3 years that he potentially be a top 10 draft pick, maybe higher, right? And then, I mean, you look at what the left tackle position, how valuable that is in the NFL, right? Like, if he's a blindside protector for a decade, like I think he could be, then I could argue that it's the same for both answers. Like Joe Alt is that guy right now, man. And he has the potential at 6'7" plus 317 pounds to be a blindside protector and maybe a Pro Bowler at the next level. So I think Joe Alt's the guy for me.
Who would it be for Notre Dame? I'm with you on the NFL one. That's the easiest one for me. Who would be a couple other guys that you might look at and say, maybe this guy for the Notre Dame career could be there as well?
Benjamin Morrison is one that's, like he would be up. I mean, he's a freshman All-American. He had 6 interceptions. Like if people keep throwing at him, man, he might be in the conversation for most interceptions in his Notre Dame career when it's all said and done, right? Like,
it also wouldn't shock me if he only ends his career with like 8 interceptions, you know?
Right. Yeah. Because they stop. They're like, nope, we're good now.
Forget that.
Seriously. Yeah. He would be the clear second, in my opinion, after Joe Alt. I would look at him and be like, yeah, that's probably a guy. I mean, maybe a sleeper's like Billy Schrouth if he's a 3-year starter at guard and he's like an All-American level. Like,
there's
I don't
a guy
know.
we talked about earlier that I would put in that comment. I could see being in it because he's a very low floor, high ceiling guy. It would not shock me if Josh Burnham ends up becoming a star.
Yeah, sure.
Again, long way to go, but you just can't teach those athletic tools, man. You just can't.
Agree.
Some of the linebackers, Snead, Osbury, Drake Bowen, Ziegler, I could see one of those guys being like the next Butkus Award winner. I mean, we've seen it. Benjamin Morrison's in there. I think the receivers we talked about, like Dion would be tough for me to say that just because I don't think he's that kind of elite guy. Tobias maybe could.
Yeah.
So
someone said Charles Jagasoff. There's somebody in the 2023 class, recruiting class. Absolutely. No doubt.
Jeremiah Love could end up being just a star. I mean, Jagasaw. I mean, there's a lot of potential guys that could be great. And that's what the excitement is about this team, Ryan. I mean, here's a guy we haven't talked about, Kenny Minchie.
Sure.
Right? Like, who knows? I mean, if Tyler Buckner becomes a 2-year starter and lights the world on fire and wins a Heisman, there's a lot. The point is, Ryan, Joe Alt's the easy one. And it makes like he's already been an All-American. Benjamin Morrison's the second easiest one. But I think the exciting thing for me, and I'm curious on your thoughts on this before you leave, is it's the fact that I listed a bunch of names and your reaction to every single one was like, yeah, I could see that. Yeah, I could see that. Yeah, I could see that. That's what excites me about this. There was not one where you're like, because you're like me, Ryan. I know exactly what you're thinking by your facial expression, right? And we're similar that way. There wasn't one where you were like, like, really? Like that guy? That's what excites me about this team is I don't know if all these guys are going to reach their potential, but if a bunch of them do, this team is a lot more athletic, especially in the younger classes, than I think a lot of Notre Dame fans recognize because the recruiting rankings didn't reflect, in my opinion, how good these last 2 classes were. Sure. And that's where I start to get excited about it.
Yeah. I mean, they're not just recruiting good football players either, right, Brian? I mean, if we're talking about elevating, to the NFL level eventually, there's a lot of traits on this team too, man. Like there's some guys with length, athleticism. Like I could see a lot of those guys being NFL players if they're developed properly. Like that's kind of the end all.
I had you write an article recently about next year's combine.
Yeah.
What would have been a fun article is who are the guys on the current roster that you think could blow up the combine? And you know what? That's not a short article, Ryan.
No, it's not.
That's not a short article.
No.
And that's what's exciting about it. I mean, I just can't wait to see if Josh Burnham stays healthy and develops the way we think he can. I can't wait to see that dude at the combine. I can't wait to see
he's going to have like
Ziegler and Snead.
He's going to have a 40-inch vert at like 255, 260 pounds. Like what, dude?
5'5". Yes, I can't wait to see those guys. And there's a lot of guys like that, Ryan, that I think could end up being really good combine guys. And Notre Dame hasn't had they've had a lot of the grinders.
Yeah.
And good at like Drew Tranquil's a good athlete. Nolan Ziegler and Jalen Snead are elite athletes.
Yep.
And that's the difference. And that's what gets you excited, right? Julian Love was a good athlete. It was really smart.
Yes.
Benjamin Morrison, Christian Gray, Micah Bell, they have chances to be elite Cam Hart is going to, if he's healthy, I can't wait till we see what Cam Hart does at next year's combine.
Yeah.
Like, tell me if I'm wrong, Ryan. 6'2 plus, 205 pounds. He'll be a low 4.4, jump well over 35 inches, probably 37, 38 inches, have a borderline 11-foot broad jump, and have really, really good agility numbers. He's going to be one of the best corners at the combine next year from a testing standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely.
Am I wrong?
No. I mean, if he hits all those numbers,
Yeah.
especially, and I mean, there's no reason he can't hit those numbers. This is the crazy part.
Well,
And
because I told you this, I was talking to somebody recently, and I was like, I was asking about Cam Hart, and I shared this with you, Ryan.
yeah,
I was like, he's a like a 4-4 guy, right? And the guy just looks at me, kind of smiles, like, dude, he's a freak. Like, you're underselling it, because we've heard for 2 years when everybody talks about fastest guys, everyone's always like, oh, don't forget Cam Hart. Don't forget Cam Hart. Don't forget Cam Hart. He's one of the fastest guys on the team. And the one I'll always remember is that play of him and Kyle Hamilton running down the field after a Florida State kid. And like
yep.
Kyle's here, and all of a sudden you see Cam like just blow past Kyle Hamilton. And you're like, maybe Kyle's not as fast as we thought. And you're like, yeah, maybe not. But that Cam Hart dude can freaking run.
Right.
That's
like, yeah, that's like you're in a car on a highway and someone flies past you. It's like, oh, maybe I wasn't going as fast as I thought, but it's like, nope, but that's also guys just accelerating crazy
I'm going
amount.
75. That guy just
like Kyle Hamilton running high 4.5. That guy's still running fast. And so like, that's a 4.4 guy. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, yeah, there's a difference there.
Yes. You can have potential. Yeah. Well, we'll get into that later. But yeah, there's some guys that could be putting up some really ridiculous combine numbers. No doubt about it. All right, I know you got to run, Ryan. I appreciate you staying on a little bit long. We'll finish up with these rest of these questions here moving forward. We got a question from Nathan Milton. Thank you, Nathan. What team do you want Notre Dame to punish, regular season or playoff, out of spite? Mine is Bama because they're so darn good every single year. Mine's Michigan. I just dislike Michigan, and all love to you, Antoine. I know our Michigan guys in here, but all love. I just dislike Michigan with a burning passion. I'm just going to be honest with you on that. So that is the one for me. That's an easy one for me. Archer 452 says, how much money does Notre Dame pay their assistant coaches? That is a huge investment to support the head coach. OSU just announced raises, and now 5 of their 10 assistants make 7 figures, 9.3 million total. Notre Dame's not close to that. Notre Dame still does a very they've gotten better, but it's just they're not horrible anymore. They are not doing a nearly good enough job in taking care of their assistants. And I'm going to have something on that soon, but they're not even close. But this is the point. Ohio State's being proactive in giving raises to their assistant coaches, which is why it's hard to get a guy away from Ohio State. Whereas Notre Dame waits until someone comes after a guy before they go at him. So Notre Dame's got to get a lot better there. And they're just, I've defended the administration for a while because there were things happening with the football staff that weren't good enough. But now you're seeing some of those things being done with the football staff, and the administration's not stepping up and doing their end. And I think that's a problem. That's definitely a problem for me that has to get addressed and get fixed like now, in my opinion. So that's a good question. Archer 452 says, what are your expected starting 5 on the O-line? You've got Alton Fisher at tackle, Zeke Correll at center. I think you'll have Billy Shrouth at left guard, and then I think there's a battle at right guard. I think you can see Andrew Kristofic there, Michael Carmody, Ty Chan, Rocco Spindler. I think are all guys that could be in that battle for the spring. I think at least 4 of them we feel good about knowing right now. I would say if I had to bet right now, I'd have Andrew Kristofic as one of them, but him and Shrouth will both be in a battle for those jobs. But that's where I'm at. That's where I'm at right now with that group. See here, we got one from Bailey Brad. This is a good one. So I wanted to get this one. Do you start to get worried if Wagner's body doesn't show signs of improvement this spring, summer? It would depend, Bailey, on what do you mean by signs of improvement? Is he the same weight, looks the same exact like he did last, in the fall? That concerned me a little bit. If there's like a 5 to 10 pound increase and he fills out a little bit, then I'm fine with that. I don't really expect the meal to start showing that kind of size really until next spring. If we're going into next spring and he's still 270, that's a problem. And and that's the only thing that could really hold him back, other than normal things, like injury and things like that. He's long, he's athletic, he's strong. I've heard he's a really smart kid. It's just the size. I mean, that's really the thing, because I don't care how strong you are, you just can't play at 270, in my opinion, the offensive line in today's era. I just don't think you can do it. I really don't think you can do it. Fighting Irish Fan 91 asks, any word on the Fort Wayne guy, Tay Johnson? Look, Notre Dame likes Bronte a lot. It's just you're going to have the same problem with him that you had with Brandon Hillman. It's just, can you get him through the admissions process? That's the problem. If you can, I think he ends up at Notre Dame. If you can't, then he won't. But right now, it's a work in progress. That's where he's at. And it's always been that way. We've said that for a long time. Notre Dame loves Bronte Johnson. Can you get Bronte Johnson in school? That's a different question. I've been told he's putting in the work. He's trying, but we'll see if it pans out or not. Josh Buffo, the motivational business banker, says, who would you rather have on this year's defense, Kyle Hamilton or Lewis Nix, and why? That's an easy one for me, and that's Lewis Nix. And that is no knock on Kyle Hamilton at all, who's a really good player at Notre Dame. But I feel, again, I like Notre Dame safety group. Is anybody as good as Kyle Hamilton? No. But I've said it. I've been consistent with it. If you give me a chance to have an elite D-line or an elite secondary, give me the elite D-line and a good secondary as opposed to an elite secondary with just a good D-line. An elite D-line with a good secondary can be really good. Notre Dame is loaded at corner. They're good at safety. Their safeties were good last year. If you could give me a Lewis Nix at nose guard with Riley Mills at 3 technique and Howard Cross playing both positions, Gabriel giving me some minutes because, Lewis can't play the whole game. That would be a really, really good defensive line in my opinion. So I feel like that's the thing that's missing at Notre Dame right now is the big athletic disruptive force at nose tackle. And that's what Lewis was. And if you could have a kid like that, then I think this defensive line would be really, really good. Got a question here from Wade Garrett. Wade asks, what position do you feel has to shine the most in order for us to take the biggest leap this year from a win-loss standpoint? So you're talking about leap, right? So yes, the offensive line has to play great, but I think the offensive line was pretty good last year. Defensive line has to get better. Receivers have to get better. Running backs continue. Everybody's got to get better. The group that has to take the biggest leap for me, this is an easy answer, Wade. It's quarterback. Now, what I'm referring to here, the caveat is I don't need Sam Hartman to play better than he did at Wake Forest. I need him to clean up some of the turnovers because sometimes he would force, sometimes it's got to try to make this throw, tip ball, whatever. But sometimes he would make bad decisions. He needs to clean up some of that stuff and just be who he was last year. Notre Dame's going to be really good. So it's not a leap for him personally, but it's a leap from the level of play that Notre Dame had last year. Has to be a lot better. If Sam Hartman just repeats what he's been the last 2 years with just cleaning up the turnovers just a little bit, I'm okay with turnovers. If I can see the benefit on 20 other plays from your aggressiveness, I'll take 1 interception for those 20 big plays, 15 big plays. So as long as it's that, I can live with that to a degree. I could live with 2 of Tyler Buckner's turnovers against South Carolina. I don't like that they were pick sixes, but I can't live with 3 of them. You know what I mean? Or I can live with 1 of them. I can live with that if you're a game wrecker in other areas. You can't live with that if the guy's just game managers can't turn the ball over. Playmakers, I can live with it a little bit more as long as it's coming within, hey, I get why he made that turnover. You can't have dumb turnovers. He doesn't need to play better, but he'll be so much better than what they had. So if you're talking about the leap from what they had last year, it's quarterback. It's easy. What would be number 2 and 3? That's the bigger question for me. Number 2 for me is defensive line. Defensive line has to be better than it was last year. I don't think receiver was as bad as people think it was because they were getting open late in the year. They just weren't getting the ball. They got to get better, no doubt. But it's not this giant leap that people think that it is. It's just a quarterback that can get them the football is really the big thing in an offense that plays your best players. I think D-line's got to get a lot better. Number 3 for me is linebacker. Those are my top 3 have to get better. Receiver would probably come in next if we're going to talk production and consistency and depth would probably come in next for me. Last couple here. Nathan Milton says, who's the most physically gifted player on the roster? That is a great question. And I will say this. I will say pound for pound, I still believe that it's Josh Burnham. I do. I think Josh Burnham is incredibly talented. He's just raw and learning a new position. But as far as just God-given ability, man, he has got special talent. Some other guys in the conversation for me, I think Tobias is incredibly talented. The 2 young tackles, Joe Walton, Blake Fisher, incredibly talented, just gifted players. Billy Strouth's a pretty gifted player. He's not here yet, but Jeremiah Love is a guy that I throw into that conversation. Benjamin Morrison is obviously in that conversation. I think those are the guys to me that I mean, Boubacar Traore is incredibly gifted. I just don't know, he's not a great football player yet, but he's very gifted. There's no doubt about that. Charles Jagasaw is going to be in that conversation. Eli Raridan, if Eli can get back to being full strength and from the 2 ACLs, he would be in that conversation for me. Those are some of the guys that I would look at as just wow, just really freaky talent. Those are the guys that kind of pop in my head. Jalen, somebody said Braylon James. He's one. Jalen Sneed is very athletic. The only concern I have about Jalen is just his size. I would actually probably go with Nolan Ziegler slightly ahead of him because Nolan is so much bigger than Jalen. But yeah, if you want to go with Jalen Sneed, I'm with you on that one too. There's no doubt. I'm with you on Chris. I'm on Jalen Sneed as well. Jaden Osbury is another one that would be in it. I mean, there's some really talented players. There's some really talented players in Notre Dame. And then let's see this last one here from Gideon Rosa. It says you have to start a freshman. What QB and wide receiver from the 21 to 23 classes would you pick to start on your squad? As a freshman, from 2021 to 2023, which freshman at quarterback or receiver would I pick? I'd probably go with Tobias Merriweather would probably who I'd go with. I think a guy like him you should have got on the field last year. And if you'd have had, I have to start one. It's him. He'd be my pick. Lorenzo Styles, maybe be in that conversation because he was pretty good as a freshman. Obviously, Tyler Buckner, I think, could have done some things as a freshman. You'd have had to tailor your offense a little bit to fit him in certain ways. Kenny Minchie, if you had to, would be up there. I'd actually probably say I'd be willing to bet that Kenny's probably a little bit ahead of Tyler was as a true freshman from a being able to run the offense standpoint. Tyler's more physically gifted. So those are options. But 22 class, the only guy that I would say definitely would be quarterback and receiver would be Tobias. 21, I mentioned those guys. It'd be Tobias. And then this incoming freshman class at quarterback and receiver. I mean, Greathouse, Flores, James, all those guys would be fine picks. There's a lot of picks that I'd be totally fine with. I'd go with Tobias. That'd be the one that I would go with for me. So that's going to do it, everybody. Thank you all so much for being with us today. Look, before you leave, do us a favor, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Do me a favor also, share this podcast. But if you're listening via podcast, if you could give us a 5-star review, we would greatly, greatly appreciate that. And make sure you sign up for the CFB Nation where you can get all the Lucky Lefty podcasts, the CFB Nation on the podcast app. You get all the Lucky Lefty podcasts. You get the CFB All-America show. I just put an episode up this morning of CFB All-America. They talked about, trying to remember what did they talk? They talked about conference realignment, the Pac-12, the Big 12 stuff that's going on with the Big 12 and the Pac-12, how decisions with the TV revenue or TV deals could impact the Pac-12 and the Big 12 and all that. Really good conversation. Then they talked a little bit about March Madness as well. And we'll have some more things lined up here for that as well. So you definitely want to sign up for the CFB Nation podcast app on Apple and Spotify as well. And if you haven't done so, please sign up for the boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Would really appreciate that support. Got a lot of good conversation going. We're going to have a lot more intel as we get into now that recruiting is starting to heat up again. We'll have even more intel coming forward on that kind of stuff. So you definitely want to check that out. So tonight, obviously, we have I'm not sure if we're going to have a show or night not tonight with Sean and Jesse. Sean and Jesse would it be? I have to check with them on it. I know sometimes they do Thursday, sometimes they don't. I have to look into it. But you always know because you'll get a notification. That's why you hit the notification bell on the podcast. So anyway, we will definitely be back tomorrow at 1:00 for our Friday mailbag. I'm looking forward to that very much. So have a great day, everybody. Great rest of your day. And I look forward to seeing all of you again soon on the Irish Breakdown podcast.